I'll call to order the August 9th meeting of the Village of Weston Plan Commission and the Village and Town of Weston Extraterritorial Zoning Committee to order. Roll call of the Plan Commission. Valerie?
Okay. White.
Here.
Linell.
Here.
Cronin.
Here.
Gerndt.
Here.
Jordan.
Here.
Marshall.
Here.
Mumper.
Here.
And alternates Maloney
Here.
and Zagami.
Here.
And ETZ. Christensen. No. Cronin.
I don't think I'm on the.
You are,
You are.
Oh, I am.
Yes.
Okay.
there was a wrong
Here.
list originally.
I got all confused.
You're not getting paid, but you're on.
Don't worry.
Paul.
Here.
Gerndt.
Here.
Olson is not here. And Minell.
Here.
All right.
The next item is 4. I would like to have any members who have a possible conflict of interest. Please notify both committees and we'll decide whether you need to recuse yourself. Is there anyone that has any possible conflict of interest?
I want to raise the issue. I am kitty corner, my northwest corner of my west 40 is kitty corner to the southeast corner of Mr. Phelps' property. I don't know Mr. Phelps. No one in my immediate family knows Mr. Phelps. But I do have property I've received an adjacent landowner notice related to the conditional use permit request.
So do you feel that your proximity to the petitioner's property would affect your decision?
No, I don't.
So, ETZ.
Randy's here.
Here comes Randy.
I mean, I don't see that there's a conflict.
I don't either, but I just
I don't
want
think
to
so either.
disclose it.
And it would be up to the ETZ committee to decide.
I don't see a conflict either.
If you don't have a problem, you're okay.
Valerie, this is Steve Minell, could you reflect that Randy joined us?
Will do. Thank you.
Okay, moving right along. Item 5, approve the minutes from the July 12th, 2021 joint PC and ETC meeting.
Move to approve.
Moved by Jordan,
Second.
second by Cronin. On the question. All in favor say aye.
Aye.
All
Aye.
opposed? So carried. Public hearings, I'm going to read the statement first. If the public wishes to speak at the hearing, please fill out the public comment form and register it with the clerk Parker prior to the start of the meeting, or please log in using the Zoom meeting information listed above and raise your hand to be recognized to speak. Is there anyone, Valerie, that has filed a written request to comment?
Not that I've received.
Anyone on social media that wishes to make a comment? No? You're up, Steve, on 6.
We have number 6 with a request from Kevin Phelps of 163130 Ross Avenue, Weston, requesting a conditional use permit to allow a proposed accessory structure for residential use exceeding 2,500 square feet at his property at 163130 Ross Avenue within the RR5 Rural Residential 5-acre zoning district. And with that, I'd like to open the public hearing. Presentation from staff.
All right, so we have received a conditional use application, and I realize there's possibly a little confusion. So the building itself is not more than 2,500 square feet. It's in total with the other residential buildings on the property would exceed the 2,500 square foot maximum that's permitted for rural residential 5 properties that are over 10 acres in size. So the building itself will be 936 square feet, but with the existing workshop on the property that exceeds the allowed 2,500 square feet by 360 square feet. So hence the conditional use permit request to allow for that, except the exceeding of that. The building would be used for storing campers as well as personal garden, tractor, gardening facilities, just to keep them inside rather than outside, and they don't fit in the existing buildings, so. Quick and dirty overview.
Okay. Is, I guess, presentation by staff, any public comment?
The applicant
Wish to
is
say
in the
no?
office in the room.
Would you like to address the committee or anything?
No, I'm just here kind of learning things.
Okay.
What's all going on, I don't have anything.
Is there any other comments or questions before I close the public hearing? For the public hearing closed. What was the recommendation from staff on his request?
Staff recommends approval.
All right.
And just for ETZ members who weren't here last month, I did put out the determination sheet again in front of you. So at the last couple plan commission meetings, there's discussion about having the commission itself do the determination instead of staff doing it. So for Mark and Randy, that's what's in front of you. Starting at the bottom of page 2, they're blank there for ETZ to go through and just make the determination that ETZ determines that this request meets those standards listed 1 through 5. That runs into page 3 there.
You want me to read it? Do I read it?
You can if you
Yeah.
wish. Are you going to assign a condition to each one or?
Okay.
Condition?
Is the proposed conditional use is consistent with the comprehensive plan, this chapter, and all other plans, programs, ordinances adopted by the village? Yes. And the town, correct?
So ETZ follows
Okay.
village.
I heard, yes? The proposed conditional use in its proposed location and as depicted in the required site plan will not result in a substantial or undue adverse impact to nearby property, character of the neighborhood, environmental factors, traffic factors, parking, public improvements, public property or right of way, or other matters affecting the public health, safety, and general welfare, either as they now exist or as they may in the future be developed as a result of the implementation of the provisions of this chapter, the comprehensive plan, or all other plans, programs, and ordinances adopted by the village. Yes?
Yes.
Does the proposed conditional use will maintain the desired consistency of land uses, land use intensities, and land use impacts as related to the environs of the subject property?
Yes.
Is the proposed conditional use located in an area that will be adequately served by and will not impose an undue burden on any of the improvements, facilities, utilities, or services provided by public agencies serving the public or serving the subject property? Yes?
Yes.
Do the potential public benefits of the proposed conditional use outweigh potential adverse impacts on the proposed conditional use after taking into consideration the applicant's proposal and any requirements required by the applicant? How do you pronounce that? Ameliorate. All right, sorry about that, folks. Such impacts.
The lawyer word.
Yep. Is that a yes?
Yes.
Okay. That. Is there any discussions? Further discussions? I entertain a motion.
I move to approve the conditional use permit for the use of a detached accessory structure for residential use exceeding 2,500 square feet at 163-130 Bird Street with the conditions outlined.
That should be Ross Street, apologies.
I'm sorry. My bad.
I wrote Birch, so that was,
Correction, so 163-130 Ross Street with the Ross Ave.
We have a motion. Do I have a second?
Second.
And a second? On the question, all those in favor, say aye.
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 The ayes have it.
Does Valerie need any clarification on that, the address change or no?
Good.
No.
Okay, thank you.
Yes, when the meeting's done, you have to say. Yep. Okay, item 7, communications, public, excuse me. Item 7, public comment. Please be advised per state statute, section 19.84, Paren 2, the information will be received from the public. It is the policy of the village that there will be a 5-minute time period per person with time extension per the plan commission chair's discretion. Be further advised that there may be limited discussion on the information received. However, no action will be taken under public comment. Is there any public comment, either written or on media? Okay, hearing none, seeing none. Nobody raised their hand, Michael?
No.
Okay, item 8, written communications. Any written communications received? No. Item 9, unfinished business. Authorization to set public hearing for proposed project plan amendments for tax incremental district TID number 2. Staff?
I can start out, I think, here. So this item comes back after being introduced at the last plan commission meeting in July. With the request from plan commission, of course, they have the project plan outlined, or I guess defined in the document. And that is what is in the document that's in the packet, which I know has been available to everybody before, or since last week, Wednesday. And of course, setting the public hearing would then start the process, I guess, to make other changes. Mark Roppers is on the line. He's given a introductory memo, kind of outlining what the purpose of this is. I guess staff earlier this year had discussed with village board that we had some options with TID number 2, and the process of putting an amendment together was something that had been talked about several years ago under a former administrator, and is now being brought forward with some reason for me being that we needed a better definition of what the eligible projects would be, eligible expenditures and so forth. So essentially this is being brought forward at the request of the village board. Staff is certainly able to answer questions. Jessica Trollman is here. One of the questions last week or last month was the impact of closing TID 2, because if we're not undertaking projects and doing the amendment, then we would want to ask to close it because we're not using the funds for any other purposes. So I guess those are just, some highlights. Again, Mark is on the line to walk us through the details, or maybe more of an overview of what's contained in the plan amendment. So I guess I can turn it over to Mark to give us the overview. If he's able to do that.
Mark, are you there?
Yes, I am.
This is Lauren White here.
Hi, Lauren.
Yeah, short Reader's Digest version, and then particularly for hit the high points that some of the other commission members may not be familiar with.
Yeah, absolutely. I agree 100%. Thank you for having me here, virtually at least. So the TID project plan amendment, if you were with the village or the plan commission 3 years ago, it's similar in form to the TID 1 amendment that was completed at that point in time, but a lot simpler in the contents. TID 2, as most of you know, it's about 110 acre tax incremental district set up about 16 years ago with the point of promoting redevelopment along the stretch of Schofield Avenue in the village west of Birch. The reason for it to be rehabbed or its function expanded is to help implement the Schofield Avenue corridor plan, with which the commission recommended and the board approved earlier this year. And to kind of refresh after 16 years of the TID being in existence and some of the projects and expenditures authorized back in 2004 being executed. In order to promote and create an environment for value producing redevelopment, The TID project plan amendment would increase the incentive budget, potential development incentives for interested parties that may propose redevelopment, knocking down existing buildings, building new, and in certain cases, potentially increasing the value several fold on the properties that are in question. So there's a additional redevelopment budget that's included in the TID plan. There's also an additional list of potential infrastructure projects that are listed in the plan and highlighted on a map. Those are to be judged against their effectiveness in promoting a business and redevelopment investment climate within TID number 2. The TID project plan goes into considerable detail on the potential projects. I think it's important to emphasize and re-emphasize that this represents the universe of potential expenditure and potential projects within the TID 2 area from now until when it has to close in 2031. Nothing in this project plan is binding the village to undertake any of the projects. And in fact, each of the infrastructure projects or incentives that are listed as potential here could only be carried out upon the village board in a future year, specifically authorizing that expenditure. The flip side of that coin is that if the project is not listed within the project plan, then the village may not use tax incremental district funding to finance or partially finance that project. So the goal is to be conservative and list as many potential viable projects that the village could conceive undertaking within the relatively limited life, and to carry out the primary objectives of the plan, which is to promote continued redevelopment within the TID 2 area. I think with that, I'll close my opening presentation. You've got the TID project plan draft in your packet. We're happy to answer questions or as specific or general as you may have. Thank you.
Thank you, Mark. Does anyone have any specific questions for Mr. Rolfers?
Is the public, sorry, this is my first meeting here. I don't know if that means public or not.
This is not the public hearing.
No. So generally what happened is when I announced the public comments was when you should have jumped up.
Oh, you're not allowed to talk during the actual time of the thing. Interesting. Okay.
So, Mr. Don.
Should just be pointed out the time to make comments would be at the public hearing, other than making the comments at the time on the agenda. I guess it would be the chair's discretion as to whether they wanted to.
Well, I think
it kind of would be out of order, actually.
Actually, it would be. So this is to schedule a public hearing where everyone could come on and voice their opinion, yay or nay on this. At this point is for the plan commission to decide whether we want to schedule a hearing, if they want to make changes to this particular plan. One of the things that I noted that the list that starts on page 14 goes through 20, that table.
Yes.
Clarifies a lot of the projects that I think maybe they may have had some questions about. Again, as Mr. Rolfer said, because they're listed in here, it does not obligate the village to do any of these projects. But the reason that they're listed is so that if they're not listed, we can't do them with TID financing. And that's the main reason that this is a lot of detail. And if you read through it, it puts forward some of the plans the village has had for the Schofield Avenue redevelopment and the opportunity to use TID financing to implement some of these things. Most of it, if you read through it, deals with infrastructure, at least in my opinion. Mr. Donner, you have anything to add?
No, you summarized it well. Yeah, again, we're not committed to do anything. It just makes these projects eligible for funding if we have the wherewithal with the cash flow and so forth in the TID.
Mr. Guerin.
I had several questions. I just, if somebody could help me understand, why are we taking land out of this TID 2?
Jen could probably answer that.
So some of those, so one of the locations is on the corner of
Birch.
We talked last time about combined properties, that.
Yeah, so that one's being looked at as, there's 3 parcels there. There's a tiny sliver that's out of it. It really does make it hard to, develop it because I can't combine them together. So the lot can't become one, so we either have to go and do the planned development on it. At this time, we just felt it was easier to take it out and that there is something in the plan stating that TID funds could be used for it so that they don't lose out on that.
Because they have a certain distance within the
Yeah.
boundaries of it that they.
And it'll state in there that they could be, it's still at the discretion of the board, but anything is at the discretion of the board, but that it would be a priority to use them for those properties that were in the TID. It just makes it a lot easier. And the last time someone was looking to develop it, they were gonna have to rearrange the site to a way they probably didn't wanna use it, so. We thought at this time, since we were doing this, that it's best to just take it out, cause it's a tiny little sliver, at least that one.
I think there's actually I
There's
can't point
2
to
of
the
them.
page that it's, Mark explained that in the narrative in this plan that
What's the maximum amount of acres we can have in this?
We can't put any more in.
So by taking out, can we put some back in?
No.
So, okay, all right, that was really what my question was, are we
Yeah, 'cause
taking some out
originally-
because we have our eyes on adding some or not, or?
Yeah, we can't.
Okay.
So back 3 years ago, when we were kind of doing the other one, there was some talk of that to kind of go and do that here, but it was decided not. And the only thing we can do is take some out.
But if we take it out and it gets developed next year, the revenue or the increased taxes on that would not help pay off.
Yeah, but this, in the case of that, it would never be, like, there was a gas station looking at it. There was only gonna be a parking lot there. All the development was on the other parcel. So it's really not, it wouldn't have impacted, in my opinion, the TID there at all. It just makes it harder for you as a planning person.
So it's just a hodgepodge, just a lot right now.
Yeah, cause it was, if you look at it, it was just a tiny,
Corner.
it was the corner and the main parcel of it was further down. There's one where it shows the map, a little bit easier to can see.
A different page, John?
I thought there was.
We can't add any more land. What's the overall final cost impact, or what can be spent in there? And does that increase as more money and more taxable base is available for incentives? Or what is the actual dollar amount that we can, I mean, these numbers that Mark's got in here, I understand there's a budget here, but what's our ultimate dollar cost that we can even be having to? Because if we want to entice businesses to move in the area, is it 15 million? Is it 9 million? What are we able to give for redevelopment costs to demolition or utilities or whatever it may be on a private parcel?
Street improvements.
Well, there's lots of street improvements listed on here and lots of improvements, but I'm talking on the private side. If we're using this in a redevelopment area, there should be some cost analysis, how much we have allocated to rebuild some blighted areas, if we want to call them blighted areas.
We interject, Jessica, would you have that figure somewhere?
So on page 73, there's a proposed increment projection. As of right now, we get approximately $600,000 a year for the increment. The debt's practically paid off, so $600,000 every year can be used for incentives or whatever we need to do for that.
that's without additional increment generation right now, correct? That would be-
Correct.
So that, I think that total was estimated at one time at come up to about $8 million.
The total increment future value is around 9 million.
So,
I'm assuming when we do improvements on our public streets or water, that's not considered part of your increased revenues.
it's not,
So, I mean, that's a lot of money being spent on public stuff that I was just trying to figure out how much we can actually spend on private and still cash flow this thing. So,
And that gets analyzed with each project. We don't necessarily, as you know, we don't, the classic question is, do you have any TIF money?
yeah,
And,
understood.
Give me as much as you can.
pardon?
Give me as much as you can.
Well, and that's really not the answer we've been trying to give people. We've been saying, we're trying to get some more discipline in this whole process. But we did talk about the dilemma of the expenditure period and the closure period, and, how we don't have, and now we may look at more favorably at some grant money, and especially if we're talking about redeveloping some sites or incentivizing some redevelopment of sites, things like that. So it's discretionary on every project. I guess would be the only answer I can give you there.
Yeah, and I guess
Should we have our arms around that budget, or should, I'm sorry, go ahead.
It's in this report.
Robert is trying to.
Mark, do you have a comment?
Yeah, so someone, whoever controls the screen, had table 2 up, and I think that provides a good summary of what the maximum expenditures might be. And then with a little explanation, I think we can get to that line. So the first column, that original amendment and amendment project costs, that's how much was in the TID back in 2005, how much was authorized. So a total of $3.2 million. Actually, the village ended up spending more than that, about 5.8 million from its inception until today. And that's, the result of many different decisions that were made, usually not best practice in managing TIDs to spend more than is authorized. So column 3 is the additional expenditure that would be authorized within the TID if this amendment were adopted. So about 10 million potential dollars spent. That breaks down by an estimate of about 5.6 million in infrastructure and about 2 million in development incentives. And then there's other miscellaneous expenses you see below that. So the bottom line budget is 10 million in additional expenditures. There is flexibility written into the plan and the language that says, hey, if we don't spend all that 5.6 in an infrastructure, we could spend more in development incentives. But the way the cash flow analysis works out now, given the existing revenues we're getting every year, the approximately 600,000 that's coming in, plus what we would hope to achieve through additional redevelopment projects, we think that the TID project plan ultimately could afford about $10 million in additional expenditure. And that's borne out in the more detailed tables that Jessica started to take you through later in the report. Now, if that additional increment doesn't come to pass, we know with pretty decent certainty that we'll have an additional 600,000, 600,000, 600,000 every year as an added increment. So, but if the redevelopment doesn't happen, that budget would go down. And how much could be spent would be less than $10 million. So it'll depend on a constant evaluation of the actual position of the district before any of these expenditures are actually made. This plan is not making any expenditure in and of itself.
Did that answer your question?
But if I understand this correctly, the 5.6 million is what's designated here on, I think there was 2 intersections and redoing, the road and so on. If we amend the plan with just those items and we want to do something else outside of the plan, we can't, because it's just those items or nothing at all. So I don't know what we do to evaluate the intersection of Birch and Schofield Avenue, but I'm not aware that we need to have a new intersection there, or Alderson and Jelinek, or Ross and Alderson. I just don't know how those evaluations are being done to justify the 5.6. I just don't want to spend the money if we don't need to, and I don't know what we've done to designate that those items are what we should be spending our money. I don't know if I'm asking the question the right way. It just seems like we're designating those specific items, and we haven't come to the conclusion of how that's being decided.
Mr. Donner, would you care to respond?
I guess it just simply makes that project eligible for funding. If, let's say we have a development that locates at the corner of Birch and Schofield Avenue, and there's some need for some intersection improvements, we can say, okay, developer, you pay for it, we can consider assisting that by making some intersection improvements. Since, we maybe shouldn't hold them responsible for the entire thing. Those are things that we evaluate then each time. We don't have all the answers. We don't know what's gonna come through the door. We know we're expecting certain things. There's some things going on. There's some land for sale along the corridor. One may come up before another one. We don't know the timing. And item number 13 in the project plan table includes acquiring and preparing land for redevelopment. We have an estimated amount of $750,000. It's a second priority thing, but we have talked to the board in the past. The board had mentioned that we should maybe be considering assembling some sites, assisting getting sites combined or lots combined to make them more saleable. So those are things that are included in here. Again, if we exclude them, we can't do them.
We can, but after the TIF close.
Well, we can't use TID or TIF financing for it, right?
And if you recall, if you read through the plan, they have them prioritized as first and second. And if you read through the narrative, it says the status or the priorities of these particular items can change from first to second and second to first, depending upon. But the big kicker is if it's not mentioned in your plan amendment, you can't do it. So does it mean we have to do all these? No. Gail? Ms. Gail, do you have a comment?
Yeah, I'm reading through the different projects, and I don't see that any of these are going to help bring development in. And it seems like we're spending $10 million on hopes that something walks through the door. It's not apparent to me that this is a great payback.
Would it be worthwhile to go through the specific projects and talk about the need and what value they might have in generating additional increment in the TID?
Committee members, do you think that would be helpful?
I guess I'd like to know the thought process behind. I would too. The two intersection improvements in particular.
Okay. Mark, did you hear that?
The which two? I'm sorry. I think there's three at least in the.
I think maybe we should just go through the whole thing.
Okay. Mark, can you kind of like make a really quick? I think the particular issues with the improvements that are in the plan, not necessarily written in stone or in this place, concrete. What is the reasoning behind these and how do they affect development or the increase in increment, even though they are public projects and don't generate any increment? I think that's the issue. How do these street improvement projects affect developers' desire to come here?
Well, broadly speaking, assuring good, safe access to property and getting public utility services are among the top two ingredients for getting redevelopment or redevelopment to happen. So, and that most of these projects, not all of them, but most of these projects fall into that category. Number one on the list, and Michael or Keith, please chime in because you're going to be better to justify some of these than me. But number one on the list is to resurface Schofield Avenue, which provides primary access to these properties and gets cars to and from them safely in such a way to allow that to continue to happen for another 20 or so years. Time flies, but it's going to be coming up on 20 years since that surface was laid down. So that is number one on the list, at least in order.
So I guess kind of follow up on that. I know discussions with Michael were that We are having increased maintenance activity on that section of road with concrete pavement buckling. It's gonna need to get reconstructed, whether we can take advantage or leverage some TID funding for it. It would be that much more advantageous and keep that kind of an activity off the tax roll as far as debt service goes, but I think that was the thought process on that project.
There's also, I guess, storm sewer on kind of around Fox Street that's undersized, so during heavy rain events, there's, backup on Schofield Ave. You usually see a cop car that sits out kind of in front of Wendy's-ish area and, kind of blocks off access there. So it's, we want to make sure as people put in parking lots and other items that, our drainage network is able to carry that rainwater coming off the private sites as well. So I guess maybe that's how it would tie into some of the private developments too, is just ensuring that we have the capacity for any larger impervious sites.
Okay.
Project number 2 was identified in the Schofield Avenue corridor plan as a need. The geometrics, as I understand them, of Birch and Schofield aren't always conducive to safely using that intersection. And as traffic volumes increase, that would likely get worse by logic. And so this would authorize or allow that intersection to be redone to safely continue to carry traffic through the area. And again, I turn to Michael or Keith for more specific potential justification of that.
There's a reference in the description about intersection control evaluation that the DOT had. Actually, the DOT had done a safety study on that a couple of years ago, and they had recommended some improvements. So I know there's probably some accident history there too that would come into play.
But shouldn't we look at that? I still don't get a comfort level of understanding why there's a problem there. I understand that you have it in the plan, but the plan was an overall guesstimate of what we may need in the future. And I'm just saying that if we designate 1.5 million, I can just say, okay, this is what was approved in the plan. This is what was approved by planning. And this is what utilities is going to be looking at. And now we've spent 1.5 million, and I've never seen anything that said that it needs to be done for safety reasons.
So I want to make sure we're not missing each other. But this project number 3, like any other project, does not spend a dime. It does not spend a dime. It's a budgetary estimate to see what projects may be feasible given revenue projections in the district. The village could not, the village staff, me, no one could improve that intersection without the village board later saying, go for it. And presumably, as you're concerned about, they would only do so if a study suggested that it was truly warranted and there was an engineering design to carry out, which we don't have, right now.
I guess I would rather see the need for it before we start listing it as a possible expenditure. It seems like we're going about it a little bit backwards as some of the other items that are listed here.
Well, you have the ability as a plan commission to recommend as a group that certain projects get deleted or added from this TID project plan. So that's, I think, why we're here tonight, is to consider that. And then if you decided, for example, to delete that project number 2 or any of these projects, one of 2 things could happen. We could potentially increase the pot of money for incentives to encourage redevelopment and additional tax-based generation within the TID, or the projected expenditures could just drop by that 1.5 million. That could be your choice. So I don't know how you want to approach this, if you want to go through each of these 13 and say thumbs up, thumbs down as a group, or what?
I think there's one other, this is Gail, option that isn't being considered, I know Jessica had presented at the last finance meeting that if TID 2 were to close, you would be able to increase your annual levy by $64,226, in addition to giving the taxpayers a break of 9 cents for every $1,000 of assessed value.
Very
I think
good.
we're looking at the projects and considering the alternative. These don't have a high level of priority for myself as a citizen, nor the people that, if I were to take a poll, I don't think that they would say, I'll choose to spend $10 million instead of closing it and raising the levy for the entire village operating budget.
So to summarize, Gail, you would eliminate all these projects.
Yes.
I think she would close the TID.
Okay, duly noted.
So that is definitely an option. And then I would just ask you to look back at the Schofield Avenue corridor plan that you recommended and the board adopted. And I would suggest that implementing that plan and achieving those value increases, achieving the additional shopping opportunities, jobs, employees for local businesses would be very difficult to accomplish. Redevelopment of property is expensive. It's not, it's much more expensive than developing a green field site. It often involves building demolition, site cleanup, potentially relocation of tenants, temporary or permanent, to different sites. And often, as a result, does not happen with without a little assist from something like a tax incremental district. So I would submit that achieving the redevelopment goals that the village board has set with your recommendation would be very difficult to achieve without a rejuvenated tax incremental district. Now, could all that, what I just said, happen without project number 2? Maybe. So, I guess there are a number of different choices here, but I would just suggest as your professional planner that it's going to be difficult to achieve the redevelopment goals that you've set in those plans without something like TID 2 to make that happen. And those redevelopment goals add value to the community too. And they add additional value at time of closure, whether it's 2031 or some earlier date, that will benefit all taxpayers as well. So it's not just money being spent without a return being generated.
Okay. Do you want to go through all the rest of the projects? Commission members? Where did we leave off, Mark?
I think number 3, there's a few crossing points for pedestrians for Schofield Avenue. One of the ideas or vision is that we're going to have more people living near Schofield Avenue as a result of mixed use redevelopment projects and more business activity. Therefore, you're going to have more people crossing the road. If there's a restaurant directly across the street, I live in an apartment, I'm not going to want to hop in my car, hopefully, to drive over there. So this provides a potential funding source for improving pedestrian crossings, making it safer and more obvious where people are going to be walking across the street.
Mark, if I could just follow up, there was a comment made at the Public Works Committee meeting earlier tonight from Chair Husheng Zagami about that very topic. Some intersection or some crossings of Schofield Avenue with the kind of long-term thought that there should be sidewalk on both sides ultimately on the whole corridor.
Yeah, I mean, if that's desired, I'm not sure where the stretches are that don't currently have sidewalk, but that is an idea that we could massage this project 3 to include.
Well, it wouldn't be close enough to fit this one, Mark, but just it's east of Camp Phillips where we are on one side.
But I'm just mentioning that was a specific discussion tonight at Public Works as well.
Project number 4 is more or less to replace the large sign at the corner of Schofield and Normandy Avenue with an updated entry sign to match the new village logo and branding system, thereby marketing the corridor and the village as a whole for investment.
I got a quick question on that. I thought we voted on a replacement for that already.
We did, we just, the plan got approved. So
Okay.
now we're working on the engineering, the build specs for the signs. So the pretty picture got approved, but now the actual installation of the signs is still.
Okay, so they haven't been ordered yet or anything. Okay.
It's installation or design and build?
Well, yeah, I guess, so we still have to send out we're working on getting the RFP out for the actual signs.
But I thought all the funds were gonna come from our taxes off the hotels. I thought it was like 169.
Yeah, I guess I've got,
Yeah,
I'm confused
I thought it
why
was
it's
all
in
paid
here.
for.
And it might be, I don't know.
Those are wayfinding signs,
Right.
so the signs that are up got paid for, the monument signs were not part of it.
Really?
I could have sworn,
I thought
I know
it was
I know we voted on something
I do too.
a few months ago.
Well.
And it
probably
involved that, it
six or
involved
eight.
specifically that monument sign, right over there on the west, what is that? Western part of the village, yeah.
Yeah, Normandy. I know the design was talked about, I guess the financing part.
Boy, I thought the whole project was together.
That was my understanding. I could be wrong, but I'd have to go back and look at the meeting minutes, but I know a few months ago, we voted on something. And whether it was just a design or the whole project, I'd have to go back and look. But, cause I asked about using the current pedestal that was there
Yep.
instead of building an entirely new sign.
So
So,
the 170,000 was only for these green poles. That's it.
I don't know off the top of my head.
Wow. We
That
need
was,
to check
it
into
was
that.
not 170,000.
It was close. It was up in the 160s, I thought, wasn't it? I thought we were gonna try to get the money out of there, and then with COVID, I'm sure the money kind of dwindled a little bit with the hotels not being so active.
The money that was reserved for the signs was the funds that were collected during the year that we were not part of the CBB.
Okay,
Those were the funds that were actually reserved for the signage.
Okay.
There were no funds since then, that everything has been turned over to CBB.
okay.
I think that was part of, I think there were 3 other signs that got roped in with that, the one out by Mock Miller Park. And there was 2 other ones somewhere else in the village that needed replacing. And that was kind of all part of, I believe, what was one motion whenever we voted.
Right, by Clucks.
Yeah,
And out there, and that small one in by Montpelier.
so I guess I would like to look into that because it was my understanding that money was coming from somewhere else, so.
Well, funding was broken down in different sources and some was TID, some was room tax. I don't know what the breakdown is or was.
Yeah, I'd have to go,
Sounds like a knowable fact that we can certainly dig into if you want to proceed with the plan. And if it's fully financed, this project number 4 by another source, then it doesn't have to be in the TID project plan.
Okay. Item 5, Mark?
Yeah, if you could pan down,
Just got control of the screen.
All right. Trying to find the wayfinding.
The wayfinding signs were approved to be fully paid by the Weston Room Tax Fund, and it was $106,969.
that was for the wayfinding, but not the entryway signs, Jen?
I'm not seeing anything about entry. This was at the January 11th, 2021 meeting. That was when there was an increase from 68,368 to 71,443, so a $3,000 increase.
Yeah, I don't think that was it. I think that was just the wayfinding.
Oh, we don't, that's an estimated amount. Oh, page 65.
Okay, Mark, we're on 5.
Sure. The Schofield Avenue Corridor Plan has a concept for the redevelopment of the old mobile home park south of where Pine Street comes into Schofield Avenue. That concept suggests that to get into that deep site, it may be a wise idea to extend a public street and public utilities to enable that to be divided into multiple lots for redevelopment for commercial and multiple family purposes. This potential infrastructure project would fund that. This is a good example of a type of project that could metamorphosize into a incentive instead. But at the present, it's listed as a public, potential public expenditure within the TID.
There's a map on page 53 of the packet that shows that stretch.
53?
53.
Yep.
17.
It's the area marked as B.
Wasn't the owner in that? I thought the owner had attended the meeting and said that would never happen because that's where his house and family are. I thought the stuff on the left side was actually going to be out of there.
Yeah, there's two components to that roadway. The extension directly south from Pine Park intersection is into the mobile home park site. You know, there is obviously an open question as to ultimately whether that road would ever extend west. Forever is a mighty long time. But if that property owner does not have any interest in redevelopment, then it will not extend into that parcel.
Okay, any other questions on item 5? 6?
Project 6, the general concept, if you recall, we had images of how the street might look, the Schofield Avenue east of Birch, from Birch all the way east to Ryan Street. And while we didn't have the as elaborate of streetscaping as has been installed between Birch and the western village limits, we did have some to improve the appearance and the environment for investment along that corridor for commercial, for mixed use development, for potential housing. So we have a placeholder budget for additional street terrace trees and other minor potential improvements along this section of Schofield Avenue between Birch and Camp Phillips Road.
And yeah, this is a secondary project too, and it's not a primary one.
Right.
Right, but we've already spent money on other parts of TID 1 or TID 2. I mean, we don't even replace the trees that get knocked over now. I'm questioning the wisdom for spending $50,000 on trees that we haven't demonstrated the ability to maintain or fund parks to maintain them.
It doesn't have to be spent. That's the big, every single one of these issues has to be decided by the board. If the board says no, they don't get spent.
It's not suggesting it's the same level of landscaping either.
Well, I understand, but
streetscaping, I should say.
I think what we're talking about is the trees on the side of the road, not medians. That isn't part of the plan for this stretch. And I don't know if the streets on the side of the road has become an issue, or was it the median landscaping that was of concern?
Well, I think there's landscaping on the western side of the village. Some of the trees had been hit by cars and whatever, and we never took the time to replace them or to maintain them. You know, snow plows that knocked the bark off of them and stuff. And even on TID 1, we had some trees that for 2 years they were dead, the maple trees, and they didn't get removed until last year. So I'm just saying that to have an expenditure, to designate a possible expenditure when we haven't shown the propensity to maintain what we have, it just seems like a waste of effort or a waste of money.
Okay. Well, we're trying to follow through on the adopted Schofield Avenue corridor plan that did advise streetscape improvements. If the village board would prefer to unadopt that plan or to say it's not enough of a priority to actually do it, that, you know, we can make that happen. But it's our job as your staff and consultants to try to help you carry out the plans that you've adopted.
Mr. Zagani, you have a comment?
Yes. You should do something from Birch Street to X, actually not to X, go through that intersection, and it could be simplified. And I'm sure some of you gentlemen go to Madison, take a look at East Washington. It is very simple, but very effective. And it looks nice and pleasant. It doesn't have to be blacked out from one curve to the other curve. But by doing that, I think we improved significantly. When we did the landscaping from Business 51 to Birch, a lot of the development happened in that stretch. It wasn't there before. My development is one of them, plus a few others. So I think by improving the appearance of the street, you invite the people to improve the facility or bring a new facility, new business to the community. And as I said, we can do it East Washington in Madison. It's very simple, it's not expensive, and it's easy to maintain.
Thank you, Mr. Sagami. Is everybody ready to move on to the next one? 7? Mark?
Sure. So the project 7 was another project that was identified as a potential within the Schofield Avenue corridor plan. This is to create a better intersection with Cutoff Road and Business 51. It would involve and probably include redevelopment of parcels around it to allow that to happen. There's a map. I'm sorry, I only caught a piece of that question or comment.
Cutoff Road does not intersect Business Highway 51.
Yeah, I've struggled with that. What is the road that maybe we could bring up the map? Metro Drive. Thank you. It's going to be on map 3, the map right before this one. Yeah. So the concept here was that Cutoff Road currently goes right where the 4 X's are and intersects, creating on either side of it, fairly unusual sites to redevelopment. Redevelop a lot of triangles. It's hard to develop those, redevelop those. And as I understood it, it's not a great intersection to begin with. So this concept would bring the road further south, thereby creating one or more larger sites for commercial redevelopment to its north.
Okay.
Concept, it's listed as a second priority. It's probably of the ideas in the Schofield Avenue corridor plan, one of the more pie in the sky concepts, but it could happen and it could reap some significant benefits in creating value on the land to the north that is not as high or would be much higher than it is today. The project 8, as I understand it, DOT is beginning to talk about the reconstruction of Business Highway 51 with communities that it bisects. This would enable some enhancements to the streetscape of that street as well to increase and improve the environment for business development and housing development. Remember, one of the key concepts for the Schofield Avenue corridor plan, at least on certain sites, is to bring more people to live on Schofield Avenue. And the counter has always been, well, who would want to live on Schofield Avenue? And I'd say, right. We need to improve it as a living environment for folks, not necessarily within 25 feet of the roadway, but for sites that have a little bit of depth, and improving the appearance of the area is one way to encourage investment in housing development in and near Schofield Avenue. So that's, and the idea with this one, like you see with several of these, is that it's benefiting other things clearly aside from TID number 2. So you see that the project cost to the right is only 1/4. So only, of our estimate, only 1/4 would be assigned to TID 2 in the village if it wanted to and could afford to undertake this project, would have to find other sources of revenue for the rest. But, again, this is a good example of a project that, you may be presented with an opportunity. The other municipalities might be raring to go to improve the look and feel of Business 51. And this provides you an opportunity to participate in that, should you choose, as that project kind of evolves over the next few years.
Does staff know if the other municipalities have their project plan included to make improvements there?
Rothschild's indicated that they were planning to do some streetscape. We don't know what, I mean, it's very preliminary right now with the DOT in terms of when this gets done, but they did want to know if the different communities were going to be participating or putting in some of that stuff as part of this work. It would be non-participating in terms of the DOT jargon, meaning the DOT wouldn't pay for it. It would be community contributions.
So they would start at Von Kennel and then go west?
Business.
Boltman, I mean?
It's installing, this is reconstructing all the way from the highway.
From the dam, isn't it, all the way to the highway?
The Grand Avenue, I believe, isn't it?
And Rothschild would participate in that?
In streetscaping it.
Really?
Yep.
They have a TIF right in front of Shopko and all that.
Right.
Mr. Carey,
I was just, they may have answered, I was just asking if that's why we did it in quarters, if there's other municipalities contributing.
Any other questions on item 8? 9?
I think 9 and probably possibly 10 are in the same category. They're to enable the TID to contribute up to half of the total cost to reconstruct 2 intersections of Alderson, which more or less bisects the TID, bringing people from the north and south to the TID. So the theory here is that it's improving access to the TID, allowing people to get to and from safely, and therefore the suggestion is that TID might be a potential source for at least half of the expense of those types of projects. And I would just go on to add 11 is more or less in that same category. Instead of moving people in cars, moving people on foot along Alderson Street to get into the TID.
Any questions on either of those? 12? I think we're on 12, right, Mark?
Sure. So 12, I'm going to actually pass off to Michael because I'm going to botch the description of this one. But it is in the category of providing reliable utility service and quality water to the TID.
Michael?
So project 12 is the manganese and iron removal plant that is part of our water master plan for improving water quality in the village. Wells 1 and 5 have a fair amount of manganese primarily, as well as some content of iron, which we've had several business owners along the Schofield Ave stretch kind of, I guess complain about some of the extra maintenance that's needed in their plumbing systems due to the quality of water that they get. So this is a project to help improve the water that's feeding through this this part of the village. So I guess that was the reason it was included in with this plan is those 2 wells are just south of the TIF 2 boundary, and for the most part are the wells that are providing these businesses this area with water. So.
Do you have any questions for Michael?
Yeah, I've got one. Not to sound arrogant or anything when I say this, is the water, shouldn't the water utility be able to afford a project like that on their own? I guess.
Yeah, so it's a lot of these projects they're in the TIF plan, they're in our capital improvement plan, they're in the water plan, but as grant opportunities or other things come up, say the water utility ends up being $500,000 short on being able to afford this project. Because it's in the TIF plan, we'd be able to help the utility, you know, pay for that, you know, maybe a little bit of I think it's about a $5 million project, you know, so here we're saying 1.2 is, you know, maybe possibly a TIF contribution. I mean, the water utility can do this project without any TIF funding, you know. I guess, I mean, that's the point on some of these projects is we're just making it so they're eligible for it. We're not saying that the TIF is going to pay for it or.
Yeah, but once it's out on paper, I mean, it's engraved in stone. I mean, I don't understand why the utility wouldn't pick up that cost. I understand that it has to go through approval process, and I've heard that 2 or 3 times tonight already. What I'm saying is that if the people that are not under the utilities right now, the water utilities, they in turn are going to be subsidizing, if you would, some of these expenses under the TIF. Is that correct? I mean, the TIF itself is good. If we pay that money out of the TIF, it's paid by the taxes that are generated in that TIF. Now, whether it can afford it or not, what I'm saying is that why wouldn't we use it just as utility expense? Is it just to save the percentages that would normally go to the school and through the tech and to the county?
It can help keep rates down. That's a number 2 priority in here. It would make it eligible, but it doesn't make it carved in stone and it'd be done. You can certainly make a case that the TID could or should contribute based on the benefit it provides.
Provides the water for most of the TIF.
It's not 100% of the cost that you're suggesting be provided through TIF.
Yeah.
Mr. Zagami, you had a comment?
Well, I'd rather see TIF district pay for it instead of we paying for it. Why should we pay for it? It's already part of a TIF. We should use the money for the TIF to pay for that portion of the project. Instead of getting paid from the utility, it's coming out of our pocket.
Except I'm not on the utility, so it's not coming out of my pocket.
We'll get on the utility one way or other eventually. I mean,
Depends on how you're looking at it, Kushan.
Besides, we sell the water, we gotta sell the quality water. That's all it is to it.
Gail, you have a comment?
It's your right pocket versus your left pocket. It's all village taxpayer money. It's not like TID comes from somewhere else. It's all taxpayer money. And I happen to observe that most of these projects, it says, are located outside the TID boundaries, but within the half a mile. So most of these projects aren't even on Schofield Avenue proper.
Yeah, so every project.
Other than one. If you look at all, like I said, in the descriptions, most of them say it's within the half a mile of the TID, but it's not within the TID.
Yeah, if I could respond to that, I don't know if it's just one. We can go total them. Some projects span the TID boundary, and when they span the TID boundary, we're careful to make sure that we make note of the fact that some of it is outside of the TID.
Okay. Mr. Cronin.
I mean, me personally, I would think if we're gonna spend TID funds, it should be on stuff that directly affects the property that's inside the TID. So just because we have this rule that allows us to spend money on projects that are located within a half mile of the TID, I don't think necessarily means that we should. I think that money, if all those properties are putting the money into that pot, it should be spent on things that directly affect their properties, and something like realigning Cutoff Road or reconstructing an intersection that, yes, it's close, but it may be a quarter of a mile or a half mile down the road is in the best interest of the TID. That's just my 2 cents.
Duly noted. Anyone else? Mr. Podolsky.
Yeah, I think Mark touched on it a little, but some of these projects, I guess, are put in there, maybe Steve, it's in the event, all of a sudden there's a new development that happens, say, in the TIF on Schofield Avenue and Alderson Street. I think, Keith addressed this. It could change traffic patterns. It could do something that, maybe there's a huge housing complex and all of a sudden there's more people driving or trying to walk to and from, you know, the high school or Kennedy Park, you know, or maybe they're trying to walk to Crystal Finishing, Green Heck, Merrill Iron Steel, you know, we're trying to figure out what potential projects there could be. So that's why we put them in the plan, because there may be a need, you know, 5-6 years from now to redo an intersection that currently is functioning fine. There's no problems with it. There's no safety issues. But if there's a development that comes in, or several developments that come in that we hope, it'll change things. And if we don't have them listed, we can't do anything about it to try to help. You know, it's the TIF that would be the causer of the issue. So I guess that's the only reason some of these projects, you know, we thought would be worthwhile putting in there as a second priority is there's foreseeable and a project that would come in that could cause that project to be necessary, but it may not. And if it's not, we're not putting in the capital plan for that year. We're not bringing it to the board. We're not spending a dime designing it. But if there is something that comes in, you know, it's nice to know that we have the option to, I guess, address that problem with TIF money, because TIF was the causer, or the district, you know, the development is, I mean, you want to have those problems, but I guess maybe that's why some of these projects got included, is not because there's necessarily a need for it today, but if, you know, 1, 2, 3 projects come in, it could easily tip some of these areas over where there would be a need for, I think, to do these.
I'm not opposed to using TIF money like that. I'm not, but it's been 16 years and we haven't had anybody, you know, say this is what I need in order to do this development. That hasn't happened. And it seems like we're getting ahead of ourselves by saying, let's change our plan and do this and designate all these things, but I just don't see the wisdom in jumping at it just in case something might happen in the future. I'm just saying that to me, it doesn't make sense to go through all these hoops and not have a developer saying, here, this is the developer's agreement. I need $1 million in order to consolidate these 8 properties, or to change Cutoff Road, or to change Pine Street, or whatever. That's not happening. It hasn't happened in 16 years. I'm not real confident it's going to happen in the next couple of years.
That's true. If it's more than 5 years and we haven't, it's a moot issue, because we can't spend the money anyway, unless it's been set aside in a specific account, as far as I understand it. And it still has to finish by 2031, and that's 10 years, and that's not too far down the road. Mr. Downey, you had something.
The project plan as it currently exists does not permit us to buy property or assemble properties, correct?
Correct. And the incentive budget has been spent.
So that's the reason for us, one of the reasons for doing this amendment. The other is to have other project eligibility in the event that they are needed. So, to your point, Steve, the board never indicated, I don't think, to at least the staff now, that was our priority. They did now recently, and that was another reason for bringing this amendment forward.
Yeah, but I wish we would have somebody that's saying, this is what I'm doing on this site before we change everything. And right now, on the plan, and then with the hope that we hit the potential eligibility issues that get addressed. I'm just saying, it seems like we're going about it the wrong way. I would rather have somebody that said, this is what
I don't think you'd ever have that, though.
Pardon me?
You would never have that. I mean,
Why wouldn't you?
the way projects come in and get talked about, I mean, there's things in the works right now that's been talked about, you know, some of them. There's other things that just walk in the door. I mean, I have a meeting coming up with someone on the corridor. As he said, there is nothing to do assembly of any property. And when we went to the board to talk about it, you know, there are properties for sale along there. In the past, all that were given were landscaping grants. That's why not a lot had been done along there. Things were happening kind of on its own, and it was really only landscaping grants. In my opinion, it wasn't used the way it should have been. if it was a redevelopment TIF, it should be used to redevelop the sites. And so that's assembling sites for people to put things on. And then we know that there's properties there that are not selling because their use is done in their current form. They've been sitting there for sale.
Small or?
Mr. Karen.
I have a question on the incentive amount. Mark, you just made a statement that you're out of incentive money.
Yeah.
So this draft that we have in front of us that gives us $2 million for incentive, is that the maximum?
That's the way it currently balances right now with that table. By the way, we've been through table 1 except for that land assembly. That was the last thing in table 1, but it's an important transition. That money, I think it was $750,000 for land assembly, could instead take the form of a grant to a private entity that says, hey, I need to buy these 4 properties to make this happen, but I need $175,000, and here's my justification for that. That could then increase that $2 million by that $175,000 to reallocate some of the funds that we currently have pigeonholed in the infrastructure related project construction line. But yeah, so I take that back. The original project plan allocated $310,000 for incentives. There's been $271,000 spent on incentives. So I guess technically speaking, there's $39,000 of unspent incentives from the original project plan, but that's not going to get you very far. So the $2 million we came up with based on a couple of different directions. The first direction was my understanding of working throughout the state on a common or median amount of incentive dollars that go to a redevelopment project. And I think you could probably, with that median, fund 3 to 5 redevelopment projects at their amount to make them go with that $2 million. Now, again, if the village decided not to spend $1 million on helping with the water, the cleaning up the water, then that $1 million could potentially go to that incentive dollar pot. The key is that, we don't go over that 10 million one of additional added expenditure that's on the bottom of column 3.
So technically, as Janet stated before, it's the past TIP wasn't really used to incentivize development. And right now we've got about $9 million done in other projects outside of incentivizing, correct?
Yeah, we've assumed that we wouldn't be able to pull off all those infrastructure projects. I mean, we're sort of with you, the people that are saying that these are a lot of projects. They are a lot of projects. And there's really, unless things really go bonkers within TID number 2, there's no way the village is going to be able to do projects 1 through 13, all of them. So that 5.5 million, 559 is only the first priority projects in the list. So for planning purposes, we're just assuming that only the first priority projects would be carried out. Now there's language in the plan, if you read it cover to cover, that says, hey, if there's a second priority project that all of a sudden bubbles up to the first priority because a developer really wants it, for instance, then that can happen. This TID plan is not prohibiting that, but you got to kind of always keep your eye on the overall budget to make sure that you're not, overspending in such a way that obviously you have a negative cash balance in 2031.
So my question is, and I don't know the full term and the full analogy of these, Mark, when I make this comment, don't take it in a bad way.
Yeah.
But I'm just going to say, if I wanted to say, well, why don't we develop $4 million in incentives to give the people to redevelop? Because maybe we might get $25 million instead of $10 million worth of taxable properties.
Yep.
Wouldn't that be the best financial obligation as a taxpayer using their money?
Yeah, we have to try to create a realistic assessment of projected value, something that passes the sniff test. And I had projected or assumed that of all those redevelopment sites, the letter A through J or whatever they are on those maps that we were looking at before, we're not going to get redevelopment on all of those within the next 10 years. I don't know which ones we're going to get redevelopment on, but if we hit the jackpot, I would be shocked. So I don't want to prepare a plan for you that is based on an appraisal of redevelopment that I don't think has a reasonable shot of happening. So this is based on a projection of redevelopment that I think has a reasonable shot. And there's a table later on that shows you which sites I assumed would develop and at what value. So if you wanted to, you could study that. Gary, I'm not sure if I'm answering your question correctly, but as I gauge at least some of the comments in the room, there's a couple at least that suggest or ask why we're keeping the TID open in the first place. I guess that is a debate or a question that you all can have. But I also hear some suggestion that maybe that incentive pot, could go up and the project pot could go down, and some suggestion that from some that projects that are entirely out of the TID would be among those that would be the first to be cut.
Well, I understand you got to get to the TID, right? So I understand some of that analogy. I'm just throwing out the analogy of, if there's more incentive to redevelop and there's more funds to it, you have a better chance of the project going through.
Yeah.
That's just my personal opinion. So if I'm going to do an investment that's going to pay back, I mean, I understand there's other improvements that need to be done here as well, but and I think the biggest fear here is that we move to approve this thing tonight and find out that we've got an open checkbook that everybody's fearful of. So, and I understand it's got to pass 2 other committees, but I think that's the fear in the room.
Yeah, well, and that is true. It has to pass 2 other committees, and then every single expenditure after that has to pass the village board.
They also have to pass the but-for test.
Correct.
What does?
Any project that we spend TIF money on is the but-for.
So the but-for test is going to be for a street project?
A street project.
That's the majority of where this money is going.
Right. And that would have to pass.
So that has to pass a but-for?
As far as I understand it.
Doesn't work quite that same way. Yeah. You basically have to, any money that goes to benefit private development, whether it's an infrastructure project or an incentive, the applicant for that money has to verify or show to the village and its financial advisors, both in staff and out of staff, that the project wouldn't go were it not for that infrastructure investment or if not for that incentive.
The village does not have to do that.
No, the village has to prove that its project benefits the TID and passes any other criteria that the village board would like to assign to it before it would, pull the trigger and go on that project. That just happened with Weston Avenue, I think, within TID 1, where that project was authorized by the TID in 2018. And in 2021 or 2020, I don't know the exact year, the village board said, yeah, we're going to go forward with and do that project, construct that project. That's a direct example, but there was no there was no but-for test that was applied to that proposed expenditure.
And I may just make a comment here is probably where I struggle or have a hard time with is that $2 million that will incentivize somebody. I think we wasted more of it on a plot over in Weston that didn't amount to anything, which has probably got some people with sour grapes. So.
Oh, you're talking about the Camp Phillips Center?
Yep.
I see. Yeah, well, the idea with this, we can go look at the maps again, but the projects that we're talking about here along Schofield Avenue, are much smaller in scale. They're often in places where we spoke to the landowners and they've expressed interest in redeveloping or selling for redevelopment. The scale of them is a lot different, I'll say there.
Understood. I understood it. Just some people get a little bit ugly about how much money was spent and there's still the same amount of trees on the property. There's no development done.
Yeah, oh, good point.
So the general administrative and legal and planning, that's almost as much as it'll have an incentive. How does that cover anybody that's working on planning for the subdivision or the redevelopment, and where does that cost? How do you arrive at that dollar amount?
That covers staff. I'm sorry, Jessica, go ahead. You're better to answer that than me.
There a percentage of salaries of administration, finance, and development?
Could you explain that a little bit?
There are a percentage of our salaries and benefits for administration, finance, and development.
So some of my salary comes out of the TIF. Some of Keith's, we all have a percentage if you look at the budget.
In each one of the TIFs that are open.
Yeah, the TIF and the general fund. And it's been like that for years.
But what causes it to fluctuate? I'm just asking about, I think,
Fluctuate, what does that mean?
well, I think it was what, I was just looking at, was that Form 300 or whatever gets filed with the state that was in our meeting. I was just remember reading that and it was quite a bit higher. Was it 70 or something like that, or I can't remember.
So we hired Tom, who was originally coded the TIFs. He's no longer here, so he only had a short time of employment, so that would be some of the fluctuation that you saw. Specifically for TIF 2, about $46,394 of administration expenses will be coming back to the village when we close the TIF. Just to give you an idea of how much is being put towards the TIF right now.
Any other questions?
Got a quick question. If we give developers incentives to do, say, housing apartments, aren't we subsidizing apartment development at the expense of the existing apartment complexes as well as single-family homes?
I suppose you could make that argument with any incentive for any project. You've got commercial development in the village. You've got other forms of development in the village. The point here, again, I know I'm repeating myself, is that to do it in a redevelopment area where the village already has infrastructure and investment and is desirous of creating more activity, it often requires that to make it work compared to a site way at the edge of town that doesn't have those challenges or additional costs.
I think the hardest part with this is the presentation. I think if everybody in the room would understand how this impacts the village and the dollars that it can save on the taxes, the benefit of using the TID or TIF versus the expenditures and why we want to use those, we may have a little bit better understanding. But to look at some of these numbers, they're huge numbers, and I don't know that everybody here even understands what's involved in a TID. And some of the things you put in your presentation here, if I wouldn't ask the question of the development incentives, these are set in stone, right? You can't go over $2 million if you have to.
No, that's not correct, Gary.
Okay.
So what we can't go over is the $10 million. What we can't go over is $10 million at the bottom of column 3.
Okay, so
there can be flex and float between the 5.5 and the $2 million over the life.
That number can move, Mark.
Yes.
So you could be 3 million and 4 million on the incentive. You could be, depending upon what your general administrative is and your financing costs, that all these things can move around, but you can't exceed your 10,103,000.
That's correct.
Okay. Okay, all right.
And this is based on some revenue projections. You know, it's based on a continuation of increment at the same value from all the development that's occurred there over the last 16 years, plus an assumption of 5 or 6 additional redevelopment projects popping. So if those projects don't pop, you don't spend that much.
So if those projects don't pop, what's the bottom line number we're looking at? I mean, is it $6 million? Is it $7 million?
Well, we could look at a table later on to figure that out if someone wants to take me down there.
That was the number we talked about earlier. Jessica mentioned
About 600,000 a year,
Okay,
600,000 annual.
so.
I'm sorry.
So that's what in the 10 year, you got 6 million.
Well, just,
Yeah,
no,
about
just
6
before
million.
that would be, we know that would be restricted based on what the increment is in TID 2. So.
But of course, you wouldn't have a reason to spend a lot of money if you're not getting redevelopment. I mean, it's all going together.
So
And it
there's
looks
no-
like you also issue $5 million of new debt in 2026.
Yeah, it's based on, it's an assumption. It may happen that way. It may not.
So Mark, or Jessica, this 1925, let's say nothing happened. Is that administrative cost still left there?
Yes.
Usually look at it.
Table 2. And Gary is getting to the point that I have a little trouble with the math. So when you look at column 1, table 2, general administrative actual, original and amendment project costs, $180,000 represents 10% of $1.8 million in actual infrastructure construction. Column 2 represents 20% administrative cost. Column 3 recognizes about 30% being administrative cost to develop $5.6 million. So I'm having a hard time how we're coming up with administrative costs, plugging those into a budget. Now I understand it's an allowance supported by cash flow analysis, but why is that moving from 10 to 20 to 30%?
I can't answer that question for you right now. I'm not the financial advisor, but I can get an answer for you.
I did not prepare column 3, so I'm not sure the numbers that went into that.
Did that come from Greg?
That came from Greg. I prepared column 2, so I could
Financial
assist it
advisor.
on column 2, but
Some of it may be, I mean, you're gonna have to increase the costs for development agreements, lawyer costs, that kind of thing.
Well, yeah, I
Closing costs.
understand that, Jen. So $1.8 million in column 1 for infrastructure, and then column 3, it's 5.5, it's about 3 times as much. And again, if you go back to the original 10%, I mean, 10% of 1.8 or 10% of 5.5, why would it have to go up that much? I mean, that's the part that I really don't understand.
Yeah.
Why?
Well, I think one of the problems, Joe, was that whoever prepared the plan, no one wants to throw anyone under the bus here. I think we're all trying our hard not to do that. But the 180,000 generally administrative and legal was an underestimate. And that got borne out by the actual expended costs through the end of last year at 653,000, which, blew that original estimate out of the water. So, we'll get your answer in terms of what the assumptions. I think there was an assumption of a continued expenditure or an expenditure of 175,000 a year. I don't know if it needs to be that high, but we can figure that out. But it's doubtful we'll be able to do that tonight.
Mr. Mumper, you had a comment.
I just have from a financial perspective, the costs of the people that are being included in this are essentially fixed. I understand they go up every year, or if you add somebody, it goes up, or et cetera. But in essence, this becomes a game of just hide the pea, right? I mean, we're either gonna allocate costs into the TID if we're generating some reason to do that, i.e. development, having to go out and spend extra money, right? And in which case I can see them going up. But otherwise, you're simply gonna allocate a percentage of each person's salary, right, into the
We're not
TID.
planning on changing the salary allocation or planning on sticking around the $50,000.
Yeah, but my point is if you don't, you either allocate those costs into the TID or you allocate them to the general, to everything outside of the TID, right? I mean, it's kind of like a fenced in little area within the community. If we do a lot of development, I can see where you just initially somebody threw a number at the wall, because who knew, right? How much development costs were going to be or how much legal fees, et cetera. You did a bunch of economic activity. Now our original number was erroneous. And on a go forward basis, you may or may not spend anywhere near this amount of money, but it just really depends on what happens, right? I mean, it's not as if, it is very confusing, but on the same token, I guess, unless we do development, your percentage costs that you're allocating to that TID should be pretty much stable, although increasing minimally every year, right? It's only if we choose to do some big development that you would have anywhere close to that amount of it, costs.
If it's 46,000 here, just round it to 50, it'd be 500,000, not 1.9.
Yeah,
Right,
but
that's my point, right? Yeah, we're not gonna spend, that $1.9 million to me is just like, it's a dart just like the 180 was, and barring that something happens, it's going to be a wrong number, right? But yeah, that's what I'm saying, it's a little bit of hide and seek.
your point is a good one, because to make a redevelopment project happen, it takes a lot of the time of the people in the room. It takes a time of like an Ehlers and Associates to analyze the finances. It takes your attorney to help draft a development agreement. So those expenses go up when projects happen, and they don't go up when projects don't happen. So I think that's your main point, and I think it's a good one.
Yeah, right. That's what I was trying to delineate. I just think, to me, it's a certain amount of, you're only gonna allocate so much cost to the TID, but for example, you do another big development within it.
But getting back to Gary's point, the reality is that rather than allocating $1.9 million to general administrative, I'd like to see the number less and developmental incentives increased. Because the properties that we're talking about, to redevelop them, so the Patriot building that he's in today, Slowicki's building that's next door, to tear those down and make that property usable, to Keith's point, that's pretty expensive. Tear downs expense when you have those block buildings that are, and again, to your point, hard to hide the P, it's like, it just seems like the general and administrative is more than what it should be, and we could use a little more on the incentive side.
I fully agree with you. I mean, I don't know that number makes a whole lot of sense, but.
I think the point was that those allocations can be changed as long as we don't exceed the 10 million for all of them combined. You could have some that have none, or some that are reduced by half, as long as you don't go over your 10,103.
We'll look at the assumptions. What I'm hearing is it maybe even sends the wrong message that we're spending a lot on people's salaries and on consultants and not on the actual redevelopment. And I get it.
Yeah, and I think Joe made an excellent point, because you just look at it from the outside taxpayer perspective and you go, wait a minute, we thought it was gonna be 10% and now it's 20, now it's 30. Now it almost is like a charity when you're donating money and they say, hey, we only use 8% for G&A, and you go to another charity, they say we use 30%, you go, well, wait a minute.
I don't know, again, in my opinion, and not to step on anything Joel said either, but is again, the $2 million that you look at, you're trying to incentivize people to do it. You could stick $1 million into those two sites over there, Joe, to clean that up, or $500,000 really easy. And it doesn't leave us a whole lot of money left for other projects in the community. But I understand there's other uses that can be done for taxes to try to keep taxes down. But again, I don't know how the numbers all flow and what's best to do without seeing it on an example, right?
Yeah, the reality is, since this plan was initiated, the amount of work that's been done on Schofield Avenue is pretty significant. And there really are only a few pieces that can develop enough significant value to really pay off long-term in additional taxes. And because nothing has happened with Lewicki's building in 10 years is an indication that whoever looks at that is looking at that and saying, hey, that ain't worth it.
I can't afford to do it.
Right. You know, so I'm for continuing to come up with a way to get this done, you know, to get it to the finish line. And when we go to a public hearing, I'd really like to be able to come away with the idea that we're looking for people to come with ideas that would really close the deal, so to speak, on what we're really trying to accomplish here. And again, it's just going to be really difficult without some incentives, I think, to get somebody to come in there, especially with the resistance to build retail storefronts at this point, the way that this is zoned. I mean, there's all kinds of guys that look at 2 acres or 4 acres and say, I could do this with it, but we really want them to do what we want them to do with it. So to come up with a way to really get somebody to look at that at a reasonable greenfield cost, we need to have enough money in an incentive purse to help that.
Yeah. Jen, and I'm not picking on you, but you probably get to speak to the people that are coming to you for these things. And is it the cost of demolition and rearranging these facilities to get sewer water into them and infrastructure costs? They're not small, are they?
I don't know if we've ever been to the point of anybody approaching us on that.
No, a lot of times they just look at it as, like in the case of Patriot, it didn't cash flow for him to put an addition on it. I mean, at first he talked about an addition there. It just didn't work for him. So a lot of it is those buildings are just not set anymore.
I'm sorry when I phrase that, not specific to that property. Like say another property down the road, when a developer comes to you and he's looking at the cost of the property, because most of them will. If there's no incentive for them to do it,
right.
They start
Most
penciling
of them
it.
want to just flip them. So take a house and flip it into a business, which is issues with ADA compliance.
Yep.
We have access issues, and so.
And why is that? Because it costs too much to get rid of it.
Yes.
So that's, I think what we're trying to say is we look at this and going, geez, we're spending more money on our public streets and trying to push the money through there than we are incentivizing people to bring us more tax base. That's my opinion.
I'd agree with you, yeah.
We're spending more money.
Right?
Because I look at this and go, if this was my money and I wanted to get the most ROI out of this, I'm gonna give as much incentive to bring as much money back to us from tax base if it's the tax base dollars are. Jessica, am I right? Because what are we getting for tax? What are we as taxpayers? And if we have to be confronted by a taxpayer, what are they getting on an ROI in the 5.5? They're not getting anything back. Nothing.
I mean, the village has got a $600,000 hurdle to get over, right? Right now, if we do nothing, it's 600,000 free cash flow. Is that the number?
600 a year.
600,000 every year.
Yeah, so if you're gonna reinvest, to me, tell me how we're gonna get more than 600,000.
Yes.
If we can't, I'm not so sure why we would do it.
Yeah, so let's go do the road and spend $2 million on it. What are we getting back?
We're gonna get a negative.
That's right.
Yeah.
So if we can bring a business into the community, that's gonna have a $50,000 or $100,000 tax base every year. Well, that's what we want. We want 7 of those, right?
But I think Steve had a great point when he said, we've had this open for 16 years. The economy pre-COVID was white hot, and we still didn't have anyone knocking on our door.
We weren't concentrating on this area.
I was gonna say, I don't think there's that, and I don't think the village of Weston has really been around advertising TIF money.
No, not for this site.
And that's the thing. You have to get that out there, because otherwise what happens is you look at a real estate book, you look at the property, and your mind's going 100 miles an hour, what you could do with it, and then you go, oh, well, do the math, well, shit, this don't work, it don't pencil. But if there's incentivized money that can help it happen with demolition and knock $300,000-400,000 off it, hey, now this thing's starting to potentially
So that's why we
pencil.
looked at it 3 years ago. And as part of when the Schofield Avenue corridor plan first started, that work scope for that project was to do the plan and then the corridor plan and then do the amendment so that we could do that kind of stuff and do what we're talking about now. Then it kind of stopped because we had brought it to the board, and at that time, the board was not interested in that type of project. They did not want to look at helping that kind of project. We brought it back earlier this year, and the board had said that they were. So that's why we went forward with it again.
So ultimately, I can see if you want to buy property or you want to develop like you did in industrial park, you guys do a TIF project in there. I think that's great. You're going to put roads and streets in. But I don't think this money should be used to replace existing streets outside of the boundaries or projects outside the boundaries of what we're in.
Well, some of it may be because of something that happened.
I get it. Some of it might be right there. You're right. But what we got presented tonight looks like me, a whole lot of development outside of it just to get the numbers to where they need to be. And I look at that and go, I'd rather see a reverse done on it and have more money given to incentives, try to bring the tax base in and try to, if I'm gonna do this financially for myself in business, to be in business, to make a dollar in order to keep in business, you have to invest your money in the right spots. And right now, to me, I would be going backwards on this.
Well, I think we can certainly change the amounts that's allocated for incentives. I don't know that, I would certainly not advocate taking projects out of the eligibility list.
I don't believe you should either, Keith.
Yeah.
I'm not saying that whatsoever. I believe that you should have, change your underwear in there. You should have everything under the sun, right? To cover yourself. I get that. But just as long as all of us are on the same page is that we're not all about trying to go and replace streets for no reason that aren't gonna bring us any tax base, that doesn't give us an ROI on our money. Am I in agreement?
Exactly.
That's what I'm trying to say.
I mean, any street, but we get street reconstruction projects all over the village. At some point, Schofield Avenue's gotta be addressed, as an example. And, you know, there's an ability to keep the impact to the general tax roll off by, if it can be done through.
Yeah, I understand that.
So that's the benefit, I guess.
I think at that point, Keith, that's a very feasible one to say, because that's on Schofield Avenue.
Right.
That's part of the project, right? I don't think anybody here would say, oh geez, it's in, you know, it looks like Weston Avenue, and, you know, it's rougher than a corn cob.
Yeah.
I would assume we would say, yeah, that's a no-brainer, let's do it, it's in the TIF.
Right.
But some of the other projects, I think, have caused some heartburn, and there's a feeling of, what are we doing with this? You know?
So just a point that I wanted to make was, if we have development, we incentivize it, they develop a lot, and all of a sudden we wind up with traffic problems. And we've seen it in Rib Mountain.
I get it.
How many times have they had to redo Rib Mountain Drive because of the, more and more buildings? Not to say that we're gonna have that retail strip, like, that's not in our area. But I'm thinking about somewhere down the line, you put a lot of people in a small section, we're gonna have access problems, and we can fix it afterwards, yes. But then it's gonna be probably out of time in our TIF spending window. And it's gonna have to hit the general levy. Either that or we just leave the roads as they are.
I get it. I understand what you're saying, Lauren, but I also don't know the rest of the puzzles that you guys have to work with your budget. That's why it's so hard for us when we get these numbers, so us to understand. I'm just looking at it as dollars and cents wise, trying to figure out, you know, what's the best bang for your buck, I guess, so.
Huh? Steve, I'm sorry. Your dad.
That was weird.
Are we not allowed to spend money on development incentives once we're within 5 years of the TIF closing? Or does it have to be allocated for that before? I guess, how does that work?
There's a explanation, I don't know what page it's on. I think it's page 23 now, I think we're looking at that. We can escrow money if we know that we're gonna have we anticipate an expenditure of a certain.
23.
I don't think we even have to earmark it, do we? Is that, Mark, I know you will work with Greg on getting that answer.
Yeah, I think if it's anywhere, it's on the bottom of this page, not the top. But yeah, there it is. The village may, near the end of the projected 2026 spending period, assign some or all of the then current cash balance for TID 2 in an escrow account to potentially be allocated to expenses authorized in this project plan between 2026 and 2031. And again, Steve and others are tired of me saying this or writing this. All such expenditures would be subject to subsequent village board authorization. So, say the TID had a cash balance of $1.3 million in 2026. That could be assigned to an escrow account, and that 1.3 million could be spent on any of a variety of projects, including incentives that were authorized by the TID project plan.
And at that point, wouldn't that be the smartest thing to do? Right? I don't know.
It may. You buy 5 years of potential additional development, additional value. And, these value increases from redevelopment project, they're not insignificant, guys. They could be 5 to 10 times more than the current value of some of these properties. So I agree that messaging doesn't really communicate that right now, but I think whoever made that point, or the people that made that point, it's a good one, is what are the tax advantages to the taxpayer keeping this open? And I think they are significant.
Jessica's got it.
I was gonna comment, we talked about what value does paying for Schofield Avenue out of the TIF. So we borrowed $2.6 million last year. That's $250,000 that we levy all taxpayers to pay for the debt, and that's 20 cents. So when we use TIF funds, I don't have to charge all taxpayers 20 cents. Not that we want to do that, but I think we talked about it. And the main thing is, if we don't have the development, like we were talking about, but we still have the increment coming in, this project plan will allow us to reconstruct Schofield Avenue. Right now, that's one of the reasons why we're keeping it in there is if we move forward, because we have projects that want to come in, and if the last minute they don't pan out, guess what? We can still move forward and benefit the taxpayers as a whole by reconstructing Schofield Avenue and not having to put it on the general levy.
That's a good explanation.
Mr. Gary.
Mr. Zugami, you always got good word of wisdom. I hear you. So you're talking back there with Mark. What's your input on this? You know more of the.
I'm sorry, I can't hear you good. Could you repeat that? I'm sorry.
What is your input on this? I would like you to be honest with us, please. You're very intelligent. You've been around this long enough. Could you help us with this?
Well, here's the thing. If we don't spend the TIF money, that money and close the TIF, the money doesn't go back to everybody in the village.
Oh, I know, yeah.
It will go to the people in the TIF district because they are the people pay that tax. And that's about it, that's the end of the story. But if we can improve Schofield Avenue with the TIF district, with the TIF money, I think we should do that.
All taxpayers benefit then.
Everybody benefit, but everybody didn't pay for it. And the other
Is that the case, Jessica? That if you close the TIF, not everybody doesn't get a break? Jessica?
I'm trying to.
She's trying to analyze.
This question.
You said earlier if the TIF closes like a 9 cent. Somebody said that. Gail said that.
Gail said 9 cents.
Yeah, but that doesn't go to everybody in the village.
She's saying if you close the TIF right now, Shane, that it would be a 9 cent reduction, or that would go because I'm assuming the taxes then would go be distributed to the rest of the taxpayers.
everybody in the village.
Yes.
I'm saying that's not happening. Because we didn't pay I didn't pay in the TIF district, my business pay in the TIF district.
Well,
I think we're talking.
That's not how it works.
if we
No.
close the TIF, the state limits the amount of value we can put on and add to our levy. So the state controls our levy, right? So the TIF has $2 million in it, this is just an example. The state will only let us take and then the levy ends up being, let's say, $300,000. The state will only allow us to take half of that, put it towards our levy. So we can't take the full $300,000 that the TIF is generating, we can only take 150, which forces us to drop our tax rate. So as Gail is saying, the full village, everyone will receive a tax benefit of decreasing the taxes 9 cents if we close TIF 2.
9 cents per $1,000.
For 1,000.
Approximately, that would be if we close today, obviously we're not, so that number is gonna change, but we did it as if we were to close this year.
Yeah, but it's still, in my opinion, I think we should spend the TIF money instead of closing it because it is to the benefit of the village. And also, if there is a utility in there, we shouldn't borrow from the utility money to build the sewer and water in the TIF district. Because when we take the money from utility, we take the money from the village, from everybody.
Are you,
That participates in the utility.
but let me clarify that. When you say you shouldn't use the money for what sewer and water? A relay or brand new?
But anything we do in TIF district, TIF has to pay for it.
But what about if it being outside the TIF district?
If it is outside of TIF district, then utility should contribute.
So that water treatment facility, you're saying that the utility should pay for it?
Depend,
It's outside the TIF district.
yeah, but also the TIF district benefit from.
So does everybody else that's on the water system in that area though.
If they benefit from it, they should pay for their benefit. If the water goes to that district and they use it in the business district, they should pay for it.
What about everybody else that's outside the TIF district in that area though, that pays into the water utility? Don't they be responsible to pay for it if they're gonna benefit from it as well? I'm not trying to play devil's advocate, I'm just
No, what
asking.
I'm saying, if anybody benefit, they should contribute to the project.
So Shane is agreeing with you.
Okay.
He's saying a certain portion should come from TIF and a certain portion should come from the water.
Exactly.
That's the way it's proposed.
That's the way it's proposed, yeah.
But the TIF is already, correct me if I'm wrong, the people that are in the TIF that are using the utilities are paying for whatever those utility expenses are.
Yeah, 'cause
So
they're paying
the taxes plus their usage is what's gonna be paying then. I'm just saying that I know there's a financial benefit perhaps, but I think if it's outside you're outside of the TIF, it's not dependent on that TIF, that it should be a utility expense.
Well, I look at it this way, for me, as a taxpayer and utility user, the health and welfare of our utility system benefits me, even though I may not get new sewer and water in front of my house. It benefits me as a utility customer and a village resident because it benefits the entire community. It's the same thing that good schools benefit me, even though I don't have kids in school anymore, they still benefit me.
My neighborhood is not on, where I am, we're not on utilities.
Well, let's,
No,
sewer and water in front of your place.
I'm just saying, and going out Weston Avenue and everything else, there's a lot of people that are not on it.
Correct.
That are not gonna see the benefit of having the utility pay for it as opposed to the TIF paying for it.
True, but everyone still benefits by the health of the entire community. And we all benefit, even people that are on the far southeast corner of the village still benefit from having a healthy village, healthy utilities. Even though you'll never ever get sewer and water in front of your house by the time you're, 150 years old and rotted in your grave. It still benefits the entire community, the same way that schools benefit the entire community. And healthcare benefits the entire community. It makes it a viable place to live. People want to come. Those of us that are here don't quite or fully appreciate what we have here until you go someplace else and you find out that, hey, it's pretty good here. You go to some of these places, oh my God, I can't believe these people are living this way. As an example, California, I wouldn't live there if you gave me the money. But at any rate, I look at it as I am happy, well, not happy, but I'm content to pay school taxes because it benefits the community, it benefits the future, it benefits those younger people that are coming through, that are gonna pay my social security until I drop dead, which could be soon. Mr. Garen.
So does ETZ need to be here?
No, they do not.
I was just thinking that, I thought you poor guys probably, because you guys.
I did
It has
mention,
nothing else on the agenda, so you can.
so,
that
Mr.
out.
Chairman, you can ask,
Gotta wake up Randy twice.
unless they want to make comments.
It's over, then ask him to.
What are your thoughts, Mark?
I'm not weighing in on this.
You know, you can always stay, you don't have to stay just because you're on the ETZ.
Randy, do you have any comments on this?
Just listening. I really would be interested in what you have to say. I mean, you were instrumental on, with the hospital coming and a lot of development in that area. So there is some working knowledge of what's going on in the discussions that we're having here, challenges that we're having.
Or you could offer a motion to adjourn.
Oh, well, if it's one or the other, I know which way I'm going.
Let me guess.
Obviously, we all know that the TIFs and the TID districts are key when you are trying to develop, and you can't underestimate the long-term benefits, but you're always weighing the realistic possibility of whether, where do you want to, it's easy. The example you use in with the hospital was easy. We knew that was once we made the decision, we knew that was going to develop. So it was, how do we work with the village and how do we work within a TIF to make it work? So that there wasn't a speculation anymore at that point. Prior to that, it was all speculation as to what was going to occur there.
Right.
And that's where, there was a lot of question about, was anything ever going to happen?
Apprehension and fear.
Yeah, was anything ever going to happen? So, if you do get lucky where you can say this is coming for sure, it makes it easy. If you had a project that you knew was coming down the road, no pun intended, doing the street on the front end of the project or the back end, depending on what all was happening with the project, it would make an easy decision. If you knew it was coming in the door, you would make the decision and everyone would say the benefit is there. So it has been interesting for me to listen because of the apprehension as to, do you want to be too far out front of speculation as to what might come in the door? And, it's not an easy decision, obviously. That's why you're all still wrestling with it. But the incentive, the other thing, we were a poor example because we really could have gone forward with or without. And so we were just trying to enhance the project and doing things that would enhance it to the public benefit at the time that we were doing the enhancement. And I think for the most part, a lot of it worked out well. Would there be more hope for spin-off and ancillary stuff surrounding it? The 2008 recession had such an impact on
everything, on
bricks and mortar and things that really caused a huge delay. And then there was not a commitment by the owners to get into the development, which slowed a lot of things down. And I'm not sure what kind of commitment there is today to that even. So, yeah, I mean, the Schofield Avenue, given the number of sites, when you really look at how many sites you're talking about developing and what's occurring, I think the street reconstruction probably is the most obvious and the one that makes the most sense, and everything else from that really dictates on, you know, what project is coming in the door. I personally have never been a big fan on asking just for development grants to do a development, but that's sometimes the numbers, especially when you're working on redevelopment and not green development. As Mark has mentioned a couple times, it's one thing if you're developing an open field versus if you have to do a lot of deconstruction and you know, things to the site before you can even start your construction. That's, I think, the incentive side that really is important in the village, because those are the costs that don't make the project work.
Right.
Because there's almost always unexpected costs. So those are just my thoughts on what it is, you know. I mean, I'm not a big fan of extending TIFs, because if you didn't get the development during the time that it was initially set up, I mean, you really have to question, are you ever going to get it, or what is it going to look like when you do get it? So there's some hesitancy to even say, you know, how far out are you going to go with it? And if you look, for example, at Wausau, I mean, they shuffle the money between their TIFs. I mean, you have to, it's like watching a dog chase his tail to try and follow the money to cover, because some of their TIFs don't cover and others do. So it's, you know, this is manageable, and what numbers you decide in your column 3 on that particular table and how they work. I mean, it's more based on Mark's last comment, the projected number, and Gary's questions related to what are the models showing and what is it looking at as your top number? And the 10 million number is the one that you have to get the comfort with, if that's based on what the projections are, and then work those within that top number. And you know, I haven't looked at the financial plan related to this or what some of the assumptions are, so I don't have any idea where that falls. But I mean, you can literally, I think, Mark, they could just say, we're not gonna, or we don't believe in anything in excess of our total project costs of you know, half of that amount, and then look at where you're at and decide how you want to split that between your development incentives and infrastructures. That might get you closer to what I think Gary was kind of looking at is, hey, shouldn't it be at least 50-50 between project costs we think we're going to spend and development incentives, since the development incentives might be what it takes to get the projects to even start. So I don't know if that made much sense, but those are my thoughts on it, just watching the conversation tonight. And
thanks for your input.
What about the adjournment? Is there a motion so you guys can go home tonight, or?
I think, yeah, I'll make the motion to adjourn.
We have a motion. Do we have a second?
Second.
We have a second on the question. All those in favor of adjournment for the extraterritorial committee?
Say aye.
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 Anybody opposed? Ayes carried. You're adjourned.
Thank you.
Thanks, guys.
Guys, appreciate your input, Mark.
Am I in the ET?
I'm Randy. You're.
Do I get to vote too? No.
So I've got one question. We don't have a bunch of, I mean, can you give us an idea of what's there? I'm not asking for names. I just want to know dollar values.
What?
We haven't had the first meeting with them.
So you've got a couple of them. And
There's a couple.
So, could I, Mr. Donner, just maybe to follow up on a couple of things. Okay, so maybe I don't need to go back to this. I think we know we can adjust percentages or allocation of where we think the money would be prioritized. We still have the bottom line number. I guess, again, I don't advocate taking projects out of here. On the point about the water's, wherever the wells are located, there is benefit to the TID or any area of the village. Now, whether it's 1/3 or 25% or whatever percentage it is, certainly is arguable. Whatever is not funded through TID stays off the water rates. I'm sorry?
Because they're all looped together is
Right.
what you're meaning, right?
Right. I guess to the.
But isn't the usage supposed to cover the costs of utilities?
Sure, but the rates are affected by the amount of
Maintenance.
whatever is funded by the utility and through the utility revenues.
It's also controlled by
Certainly.
PSC.
Yeah.
But,
I mean,
but why would you
it'd be up-
subsidize utilities? Why would you subsidize them?
Keep the rates down. If you have the opportunity. I mean, it's just, it's an option.
Then
So
you can't,
here's
then you
another-
don't have real good benchmarks because you're not really comparing apples to apples with other municipalities. It's a good way to hide inefficiency.
That's not so, that's not necessarily true. I think there's contributed property a lot of times through TID. We're gonna be discussing this on utility extensions and water main extensions on Weston Avenue. I guess maybe on the flip side of this, people who are not on the water utility but are within the village limits do benefit from the tax equivalent that's paid by the utility to the village. I think it's to the tune of about $600,000. And that's really not a cost of providing service either. So, you know, I mean, I get that if we don't need to do it, we don't have to, but if it's eligible, it certainly can help keep the rates down. I don't want to belabor that. We can change the percentage. If you think it should be taken out, you can take it out. Same with the development incentives and the other allocation of what's our priority. We haven't explicitly had the opportunity or the ability to direct our funding or our efforts to assembling properties, redevelopment, that kind of thing, without doing this amendment. And if we don't do this amendment, the only thing we are going to be able to spend money on is probably these infrastructure projects. And we won't, and if we decide to close the TID, nothing's going to happen for 10 years because we can't create another TID with TID 1 open right now.
It's too large.
Right.
Mr. Wodolski, you had a comment?
I was just gonna add in, I mean, so if you look at the $5.6 million here, 3.5 million of that is the Schofield Ave repaving, another $1.5 million is the Birch Street Schofield Ave project, so, I mean, $5 million is those two projects, you know, so talk about the well project, that's not included in on this cost. You know, some of the other intersections, you know, none of the second priority projects are included in on that cost. So we have projects listed that aren't showing up here. So I guess if you know, say you want to just show the 3.5 million from Schofield Ave and take everything else off this cost and put it under the incentives, you know, we could still have the projects listed, but it would change, I guess, those two numbers. But realistically, we can do that on this piece of paper, or we just don't do the projects and have more money for incentives.
Mr. Garrett.
Who votes on this after we vote on? I mean, I understand the next process will go to the board.
So there's
Actually,
a
hearing.
public hearing.
But just wait. After this is approved, okay, say it's approved, a year from now,
So
you guys want to do a project, does this come back to planning or does it go directly to the board?
it would go to the board and then,
So we don't see it again.
well, you would eventually,
What?
depending.
They go where? Such as
It
site
goes
plan.
to the board to authorize, and depending on what it is. I mean,
Yeah, you're the plan commission, so you're involved in creating the plan, but you're not necessarily involved in implementing the plan through expenditures.
that would be the board. So if it's an incentive, it would be, you might see it as the development that comes in. So the actual site plan.
Yeah.
Potentially.
See that, what I'm saying is, we do Schofield Avenue or the well is proposed to do the well.
That would go through probably public works.
Yeah, so we won't see any of those to have any input on, hey, this.
Well, you always, I mean, any member can go to any committee.
But yeah, I get that if we all have.
But it's ultimately the say of the village board on what they want.
Yeah, so again, it bypasses us, we won't see this, and so if we have heartburn with some of these things that are in here, and we say, well, we're firm against some of these things, we won't have.
Well, the board could change it anyway after the hearing.
Understood.
They could say, well, they want something different. It still also has to go to the JRB, which is the Joint Review Board, and then the state has to approve this also.
The Joint Review Board is the taxing entities that are involved in the TID. DC Upper School District, Marathon County, DC Echoes, North Central Tucker College, and that's it.
Anybody in the tax.
In the village.
I think it needs to also be said that between TID 1 and TID 2, Weston exceeds 22% of their value, equalized value, in the TIF districts. State law recommends no more than 12% so that the everyday taxpayer isn't overburdened. Yet we're at 22%. I believe when I looked up, Wausau was in the neighborhood of 10%.
Okay, actually the village had, in fact, we had special legislation passed to allow us to change our TIDs and to extend TID 1. Right. Well, extend them and to modify.
That's correct. It is legal. However, you are about double what is recommended because those monies go now only to economic development. They do not support the operating expenses, the everyday operating expenses for fire safety, police, etc., for the village.
So it is not at all uncommon. 22% is relatively high, I'll grant you that, but it is not at all uncommon for municipalities to have more than 12% of their value in TIDs because the value created in TIDs contributes to that. So many communities that have tax incremental districts have more than 12% of their value in TIDs.
But not all of them go and get a special exemption, right?
That's true.
So special legislation allowed the life of TID 1 to be extended by what, 10 years?
Yes, not allowed us to refinance our debt.
Right, because the devaluation or the
TID
assessment
lost
of property.
$22 million around 2010.
There was a huge drop in property values, otherwise it would have been underwater financially.
And isn't it just in
it was a one-year problem, right? That was, we extended a TID for 10 years because of a one-year problem.
It was a 2-year problem. We lost 11 million one year and 11 million the other year.
Was that because of 2008?
It's because the state decided to go and reduce the values of our commercial properties. The values in
during the recession.
Actually, is after that is the state said, well, we're going to reduce yours with no reason. We're going to reduce the value of this property by this much, and that's what they did.
I didn't see it on my tax bill.
Well, you're residential. You're not.
No, I'm not commercial. Yeah, me too.
How long ago was that?
I don't remember ever seeing a year where we had it reduced down.
Yeah.
Mark, I just wanted to ask you just in general, younger growing communities are more likely to have a higher percentage than established older communities? Is that a fair?
Well, municipalities can create and expand TIF districts, TIDs, up to the point where 12% of their value are in TIDs. But particularly for growing municipalities where you're getting more value in TIDs, because that's the whole point of it, right?
Right.
You're going to go over 12% in total value. I work in DeForest. We started with a number of TIDs 10 years ago, well under 12%, but there's been new development projects and redevelopment projects that have occurred there that push that number over 12%. So my only point was, Gail raised one example that was under 10%. I'm sure there are more. There are many examples also that where value has gone over 12% and is at 12%, over 12% for many, many years. Now, what happens with those municipalities is that they cannot expand or create new TIDs while they live in that world, but it is not, at all uncommon.
So just by the increment increase in a TID, you could exceed your 12%. If you had set your goal at 12 and we're at 12, and you created so much increment that you wound up at like 15%. Is that possible, Mark?
Yeah, that's common, and that's really what you want. If you were at 11% and then you had 9% of your value in TID, you know, that may be indicative of a problem, that you're not creating a value in the TID and it's not doing what you want it to do. All things being equal.
But we also have, we also have the extension. So what was supposed to be a 20-year payback is now a 30-year plus payback.
Fair enough.
So not a really good return on investment.
I encourage the commission to focus on what it would like to do with TID number 2.
I guess we're trying to rehash history. We're at a point in time we need to move forward.
So I agree, Mr. Chairman. I think we should talk about whether or not the plan commission wants to close it. So can I make a motion, a civil motion that we close TID 2?
Well, I don't know if that's specifically stated on the agenda. You can not authorize the public hearing.
Well, okay, so that's where we're going, but if we're not going to authorize the public hearing, it'd be nice if the staff had some indication of why not. So how do we communicate that to them?
Communicate this to the board. The board is directed that the public hearing be held.
Say that again, Keith.
I think the truth of it hasn't the board already directed that the plan commission conduct this hearing?
They wanted us to amend the plan.
And in order to
And
do
the
that,
only
we have
way
to
to
have a
do
hearing.
that is to hold the hearing.
And we have to authorize the hearing? I mean, I'm just curious, if we don't authorize it, I'm just curious what happens.
Was the board can conduct the hearing then?
Yep.
But Mark, are you able to provide any guidance on that? This is
I'd have to research the question. I don't know.
Or change the proposed uses.
Well, I think that it's all speculation, and at this point, I think if we don't set the hearing, we're not gonna hear what's gonna come from the public. If we find out from the hearing process that this isn't gonna, then you make the decision to either modify your project plan, or you start another thing, we're gonna close the TIF. And that's the village's prerogative, from what I understand, to close it.
Well, so what's the horse in the cart? I mean, so if we're gonna present something to the public, isn't that what we're working on tonight?
True. As far as I'm concerned, if I was making the motion, I'd set a public hearing and let the chips fall where they may. If you want to propose a change to the TID project plan amendment, do so with a motion to say, I move that we do. Example only, I'm not moving. I'm gonna do this, but I think we should eliminate those projects that I don't want in the list. You can do that. Or you can say, I want the flexibility to have not to exceed $10 million to distribute as projects come along. There's any one of a number of possibilities, but you need to make sure that you make your motion so that you don't get yourself into a corner.
I just want to clarify something that you said. So if we move not to set the public hearing tonight, the board could just make an amendment to this TIF district without any public input, is that correct?
That's not correct.
It's not correct. No.
But prior to this, the CDA was the ones that looked at the TIF.
Okay.
So.
I'm just trying to clarify.
Again, the ordinance, and could remove those powers from the planning commission if they wanted to proceed. They could give it back to the community development authority. That's where it was prior.
Okay.
It had been planning commission, it went to CDA, we brought it back to planning commission.
Was chair of the CDA when that was our power. Mr. Karen.
Can I don't want to put Joe on the spot, but I want to ask Joe, what's your
Well, I'd like to continue the TID, and only in the presentation that is made to the public, you know, I would want to have a public hearing. The only thing that I'm suggesting is from our conversation tonight, quite a few of the members would be in support of modifying the presentation to include more money for incentive and less for general administration in recognition of what are we trying to do here. We're trying to close the deal. And this is our intention is we're going to add incentives to try and get Schofield Avenue done so that when the date comes, it is done.
And I believe you can do that in your motion, but you just have to be careful how you word the motion.
Well, I was just gonna say, can't we just put a total dollar amount on the bottom and just
That you can also do.
claim the infrastructure related project, related project?
Without placing a number on those specific categories?
We could have Greg from Ellers weigh in too a little bit more on that so that we have an understanding of why he put that number there.
Why you put what number there?
That,
GA
the
number,
1925 number.
1.9 million.
Yeah, market indicated,
Yeah,
yeah.
page 67.
Yeah, I get that. I'm not,
Yeah, right here.
I'm saying.
Are we
maybe-
leaving the, is it, part of the motion that we leave all the projected projects, even those that we said didn't provide a lot of value?
There's not, Gail, there's not even a motion yet. I think that the deal is to, if we want to set a hearing date, if you want amendments to the project plan, you need to state it, you may want to state it in your motion, either specific or generally.
So we could make a motion to move forward with a public hearing, but alter the presentation to provide additional incentive in, i.e. category 2 versus category 3. Is it?
I believe you can modify any one of the things that are presented in the amendment plan.
Yeah, and it could still be amended at the public hearing also.
Yeah, I would encourage you to, if you had general or specific amendments that you'd like to offer, to include them in the motion now, so we can have a project plan that accurately or as best as possible reflects at least some of your opinions by the time we get to the hearing, so we're not in a 2.5 hour meeting, you know, like we never had this one.
The other issue too is that my opinion about what is incentive is most definitely different from everyone else's opinion as to what incentive. If we're trying to get a plan that's going to be disagreeable to everybody, generally it's a good plan. It's right, because not everybody's going to get what they think is correct. But if it's good, if it's generally acceptable and you only grumble a little bit, I think we probably should go through with, even though they are all perspective, none of them are written in this case, concrete, considering they're street projects. But I think your idea about increasing the incentives isn't bad, but I think if we restrict it to the incentives, I think we want to go down to the bottom figure and leave that one intact. Mr. Gant, you had a question?
Jessica, could you please answer me on, if we extended this, we know that we'll have $6 million of cash flow, correct?
I guesstimated around 5, but yeah.
Isn't it 10 years?
It's not 10 anymore.
It's 9.
Yeah, we're 9.
9, 9, 6, 5, 5.4. Minus we got financing costs in there? Right?
There's the amount that we have currently can pay off the debt. So there's no more financing costs. Unless we take out new debt.
We're gonna be, the TID 2, or this one is gonna be paid for, our debt for it is gonna be paid for. Is it this year or
next year.
So if we get the CDA together and decide to pay it off early, we could. Right now, we're wrestling because if we have these projects that we want, we might just want to keep the funds and pay for these projects that we have right now.
So rather than borrow money, we could use the money that's available to use.
Okay. Now, I would like to have you answer that question. What projects? What projects do you have slated already?
There are 3 projects that we're talking about, and if we want to.
Okay, they're private projects or are they municipal projects?
They're projects in the TIF.
And are they,
They're not public infrastructure projects.
okay, okay, so they're potential projects that we're trying to be quiet about, I understand.
Development projects.
Okay.
So
All right, so we do have some stuff coming up. And that's why I was trying to put a dollar value to that.
Right,
To have
but I don't-
people understand that we do have stuff in the table here that's, you may know more than we do, but by not communicating some of that is making us resistant.
But I can't.
I know, I understand it, but you could say, here's a ballpark of how many millions of dollars is gonna be put into the, whatever. So,
You know about one that was coming.
well, I probably know a couple of them, but
You're not talking about them either.
I'm not gonna either, no. So can I throw something out here that, and it's just for, why don't we take the 3.5 for the infrastructure related in item 3, make a motion. Why don't we, I don't know, I'm trying to, without understanding the formula of what you're gonna have, I don't want to waste the money at the end either.
Can be always reallocated amongst the funds.
Can be at the end?
Yep.
You can use it to hit one of these other projects then if there's excessive in there?
Right,
As long as it's listed.
That's why, as long as it's
you could
listed.
spend more in any one category, as long as the bottom line.
You don't exceed the bottom line.
Or this, we're just at the planning stage, not the.
I'm just trying to, I just don't wanna put a number out here that holds us
But you
back.
can't put it to a project that's not listed.
Right.
No, I understand that. I was just wanting to make sure that if we say it's 3.5, then I say, okay, I want you to put the incentives at 3 million. I want you to tell us where the heck the 1,925,000 is coming from. And then financing costs, I would like to understand that more. Where is that gonna be? And to give us a final number on the bottom,
But you're not able to make a motion on that because.
because we don't know here.
But can you take just the 10,103,000
Yeah.
and just establish a new number? So if you're looking at the 21 administration, what is that, 653?
653,990.
So if you do that into the 2 top numbers, it's about 18%. If you do 18% into the 3rd column with the 55 and the 2, it's about 1.3. So that's 625,000 right there. I don't know how Greg did the formulas, but if 18% applies to one side, shouldn't it apply to the other side? I have no idea.
But it's still allows.
And actually, in scale, with more projects, it should be less. It
Yes.
shouldn't be 18%, it should be maybe 12%. So maybe 1,200, so maybe 725, maybe $800,000. So now take another million, and that's your number. So
And it's still.
go at 8.2, and then you can still arrange it the way you want.
Because, let me understand it, because even if it's 8.2, if there's extra money in there at the end, you can allocate it to any one of those other projects that are on this list.
That are listed, yes.
As long as it's listed.
Yes, as long as it's listed, correct. Is there something else in there that you'd rather have in there? You know, if you're gonna move it towards the incentive, you can do that.
Yeah.
It's inside the plan. But if there's something not in the plan, nothing that's talked about right now, that it can't go there. It can only go to what's been listed.
It's similar to what happened with TID 1. That's why there was so many projects in there, because we wanted to make sure that we,
Every possibility covered.
right. And we went to the JRB, they understood that. That there was a lot of projects in there.
So the next thing is, I'll ask before I make that motion, or try to make a motion, is how are you gonna advertise?
What?
How are you gonna advertise? How are you gonna advertise that you're giving incentive to somebody to do redevelopment?
Are we giving? I don't think that's what we.
Not giving,
decide we're gonna
you
do.
gotta understand, it's
We're gonna-
TIF money for redevelopment.
Right.
You cannot have a piece of property out there for sale for $500,000 when somebody goes, what am I gonna, I gotta tear that place down, right? So they got $500,000 in land and they got another $250,000 or $300 to tear it down. They're into it for $750,000 before they even put a bucket in the ground.
Right.
So that's what I'm trying to say is, that person's gonna walk away. You just lost that person. So how do we advertise that and make sure that this district is open for potential redevelopment costs?
We talk to individual property owners that have properties in those target areas and we get a sense of where they're coming from and tell them that if they have.
Could you send a letter out to?
Realtors?
No, to the whole TID, realtors.
Well, so the entire TID is getting notice.
No, just to the, notices to the entire TID that says you may have, if you're selling, you may have possible TID monies.
Well, they're gonna be.
And that's that.
Because sometimes, Mark, in all honesty, I've seen it in a real estate magazine where they'll show an old facility and they'll say, so-and-so has a potential of variable TIF money or TIF district money.
They market it as TIF two. It gets marketed that way a lot of times, but prior to this, there wasn't anything to give anyone.
Yeah, and that's how you had to answer the call.
I think the landowners need to have the strength to be able to say that.
So they'll be invited to the hearing. As part of it, like if you look at this, I have to give, and we did that anyway for the corridor plan that we did. They get notice of that hearing whenever we set it. I have to send everybody who's within the TIF district. We actually went wider for the corridor plan, but everybody who has property in the TIF will get notified.
And then,
so they have the ability to.
Shouldn't the entire village get notified since it affects everyone?
It gets noticed in the paper.
Hearing notices.
There's hearing notices required.
Ultimately, we know why, obviously, it didn't work the last 16 years. There was really no incentive.
There wasn't anything there.
There was no incentive, so why,
Right.
not to be rude, but why even have?
There wasn't anything we could do.
Yeah, so going forward, that's what I'm saying. How do we not trip over the next 16 years? How do we make this thing cash flow and cash flow quickly? Try to incentivize the people to move in and get in there because you're gonna give them a little bit more than the next person, or you'll make help try to make the project go through.
And there are certain property owners that are already aware that we're working on it.
Mm-hmm. I figured so, which is good, right? It's keeping them there.
I'm imagining that people that are aware of what we're working on, as soon as this gets through the process, are gonna be jumping on, hey, I know it's available, how do I apply for it, how much can I get?
I guess, isn't there a TIF application that if all these projects are in the works, shouldn't we have applications?
They're applying for TIF, not TIF. No TIF money.
They can't apply until we can actually have money available to them.
Yeah.
Oh, we have no applications right now.
There's no application.
We are anticipating some, but we don't have any right now.
And that's the thing, we need to, without anything to offer, they're not gonna make the application because there's nothing to offer if it's in TID two.
And if they don't know about it, they're not gonna offer. That's what I'm asking you for marketing purposes. And I think when we present something like this.
Well, that's part of general administration, is marketing.
Yeah, so what I'm saying is I think this, with having 3 potential customers and clients that may rely on this for redevelopment, I think would be potentially nice to know if it's got, and you could say, we don't know if these are gonna come or not. We have no idea, but we have a potential of X amount of millions of dollars of development. And that would give us a little bit more of an idea or a warmer comfort to know that, hey, we're willing to look at this, or Jessica could run numbers for us, because some of us probably are not understanding how these numbers are being put together. I understand this portion of it. I just didn't, when I'm looking at these numbers of 5.6 million for infrastructure costs and seeing where all this stuff is at, and then incentive costs, I'm thinking, oh my goodness, we need more incentive costs than we do infrastructure costs right now, besides Schofield Avenue, right? But that's my input. I don't even know how to start a motion, but I know we gotta. Husheng, why don't you start that motion?
You can.
Well, I guess, I agree with you. I'm in favor of more incentives.
I really am.
Because I don't think that's how you get the development, right? I mean, you've gotta.
What kind of incentives, where would you like to see?
I think the first I think the first thing that impedes somebody is pre-existing structures, right? I mean, what's in the way that's gotta get out of the way and what does it cost to get rid of it?
And how much is it gonna cost me to run sewer and water or curb cuts into the street or?
Would you be in favor if village gifted money in excess of what their commitment was? Meaning that if they had a $2 million project that they borrowed $2 million and wanted $1 million from us and they didn't put anything into it? I mean, what I'm saying is what type of incentives are you looking to give?
I don't think, if you did the TIF application, you can't even come close to that.
No, but should we pay a business owner $100,000 for a management fee?
Management fee of what?
For the management of the project?
No.
I'm thinking, from my point of view.
I'm saying the one that I saw was they had excessive fees associated with the development. And I'm not in favor of that.
Oh, no.
But if we have this blind, I don't wanna say, checkbook for them, I don't think it helps the situation to get in a
What is
specifics out there.
That's ultimately the board making.
Is it not, yeah, not only that, isn't it 75% of the valuation is you can't exceed, so you get maximum 25%, I believe, of the project cost?
There's
I don't know what application or form they're gonna use.
But that's where the incentive issues are to me a concern, because I don't know the details on I just know that the one that I saw had excessive fees associated with it, where we were paying them to do this development and there was no payback to the village, and we had more at risk in their development than they did.
Well, and I think that's up to the
Well,
board.
the incentives should clearly be redevelopment money that makes this thing from what it is today to a green field. I mean, there are no payments beyond that sort of, covering that sort of cost to make it the site.
Show us invoices before we
I
pay.
understand it, but that's not what I'm saying. If we just have a blind number of this is what our incentives are gonna be, we have to have an understanding of how those incentives are gonna be applied. And I have not seen that.
And that's where the application process comes in, Steve.
No, I think the proposal that was circulated that I saw in January or whatever it was, had just these excessive fees on there, and I said,
So
well.
and that's, to your point though, that has never come forward. It was a preliminary
Right.
shot from the developer.
I
This is what
understand.
I'm gonna be asking
Looking for as much money as they.
But then even in the initial review, we even sent it to Eller just as a kind of a heads up to get a little background. They were just saying that it wouldn't fly this way. They need more. We would need more due diligence. We need to do more due diligence. They'd have to provide more information. We're trying to, I guess, I think we were at this point of explaining that we're probably at a point where we can't just do strictly pay-go because of the shortened time window on things. And maybe we do need to look at some kind of benchmarks or milestones that they need to reach in order to qualify for some incentives. I think this is all stuff that we need to work on yet, but we don't have the answer for that right now, but I know we need to do a better job, or it needs to be better defined. And maybe every project is a different deal too. I don't know.
Well, I gotta say, we've got a good consensus that everybody's fearful right now, right? Nobody wants to see wasted money spent, which is a good thing. Everybody's doing their jobs in here. Everybody is. So I think it's incredible. And this is a hard thing to go through for everybody because everybody's afraid to. So I think that's terrible for everybody to be in that position. So I don't know who's gonna make the motion.
It might help you to write it out first before you say it.
Well, it can be really general, and Gary, I think you can do it. One of two things have to happen right now.
We have to lower the bottom
You either need a
number.
motion or I'm ordering pizzas.
Okay,
So it's one of the two.
well, I'll make a motion then, so I don't want you to I don't want to have any moss or anything come flying over.
Moss don't eat plants.
I'm kidding. I'll make a motion to, lower the total bottom number to,
It's on the screen.
Move to direct staff to set a public hearing for the TIF number 2 plan amendment for the next planning commission meeting in September.
Whatever you want to add to that.
Anything else?
The following.
Right.
I would like to see some clarification on the 1,925,000. A better understanding of the financing costs. And we would like to see the development incentives equal some of the infrastructure costs potentially. And then we would maybe lower that number down to about 8 million. Total number on it.
Not to exceed 8 million.
Not to exceed 8 million. Now, and again, I believe, I don't know if I can do this, but I believe anything over and above that can be used after if there is extra monies in there, correct?
That's the way it's written.
Within the 9 years that are left, correct, Jessica?
Plus actually extends almost further, because if you start but don't complete, you can
So we
extend beyond, I think, too.
So at this point, Gary has a motion. Are we all clear on what it is?
Yes, I'll second.
We have a motion by Garrett, second by Mumford. Anyone have a question about what the motion is? On the question.
Please read the motion.
Is Valerie clear on it?
Pardon?
Is Valerie clear?
Valerie, did you get it?
I believe so. I mean, I'll be listening back to the recording, so.
Okay, there points to us speaking loudly and clearly. So we have on the question, anything else on the question?
Gail, I think, tried to cut it.
Pardon?
Did Gail?
Gail, did you have something?
I think that was Valerie.
I was just going to have you repeat the motion.
Good luck.
It had several points. Gary, would you care to repeat it? We'll give you a hand.
I just made a motion to approve, bringing it to planning commission,
Hearing.
an open hearing for the next month's, it was September, planning commission meeting. And I'd like to see the infrastructure, related project construction cost equal potentially the development incentives. So if we lower one, raise another. Also, we want to know where this 1,925,000, we would like to see a clarification on that, as well as the finance costs, if we can get them pinned down. And lower the total dollar value not to exceed $8 million.
That's pretty much it.
Thank you.
Okay. Anything else on the question? Mr. Cronin?
Just for clarification, so this could still be if we get some input from the public at the public hearing, we could still change this.
Yes.
Okay.
You'll adopt a resolution that'll go to the board for them to approve.
Geez, Jen, why didn't you just tell us it was a lot easier? We got another shot at this.
Anything else?
We're just not smart enough. We're not smart enough to figure that out, right?
I'm gonna call for a roll call vote on this. Roll call vote, please.
All right, White,
Aye.
Manel,
Aye.
Cronin,
Aye.
Garnt,
Aye.
Jordan,
Aye.
Marshall,
Aye.
and Mumber.
Aye.
And the motion is passed unanimously. Thank you. Next item on the agenda. Does anybody need a break?
No, let's get through this.
Okay, if you wanna. It's no fair, Carol's at home, she can take a break whenever she wants. Okay. New business, item 10, review and possible action on contractors and or consultants using tax increment funds. Gail, this was your item, was it not?
Yes, I just asked for clarification on, I noticed that you had a voucher for the TID amendment process that was paid to Roffers before we approved the moving forward to the public hearing. And just wondering, is there a process to which when we use consultants versus in-house planning?
I'm not sure what question is, but we do utilize consultants because we don't have all the expertise on many different things. We hire consultants for issuing bonds, for engineering work, in this case for putting a document together that's compliant with the TIF statutes. And I guess that's the those are decisions we need to make based on our own capacity here, our own expertise.
And time.
It goes through the village board.
And the board does approve all contracts.
So isn't it, and it is generally budgeted for in the, I know I've seen in the.
No, but did we approve?
It had been approved back.
This was probably
last year.
I had it in there.
Years ago.
Yeah, the budget Jessica showed me, did not have consultant fees in, that are charged to the TIF. And like I said, it was just the timing that we already received an invoice for his services before we were asked if we wanted to even amend the TIF.
Well, he put the document together.
Been working on it for how long?
He's been working on it for 3 months.
That would be typical of any consultant work that they would be paid as, for effort that they expend. So I guess I'm not, if there's a desire to put a qualifier on being paid, that can certainly be done. An example right now would be the assessor contract for his revaluing the village. That's being paid in a lump sum when he's done, even though he's gonna be doing 2 years worth of work. So.
I guess I'm generally used to in business that you ask before you go expend the resources, but I guess it's different with government.
Well, if you would hire someone, so I guess that doesn't make sense to me. My husband, I mean, there's a bid, somebody's doing work for you.
So Jennifer, is she maybe missing, was there a bid and approved prior to this?
This is part of of the original scope of work, and then it was revised.
So she might not understand that.
Well, it was in the documentation on the RFC.
Okay, then I just missed it, that there was an RFP put out. Is that something that was part of our packet, or maybe I wasn't on the board at that time?
This was like 3 years ago.
So
and it was budgeted for it.
So 3 years ago, we
there was a work scope, and then there was, after we got a revised one after the board said to move forward with this. We got a revised work order on it. There was still money available in the first scope. It's been moved from year to year because
carried forward.
Okay, just send me the RFP or the contract that was signed, and that's all I need to know.
Okay.
Does that answer your question for now, Gail?
Yeah.
Thank you. Moving to new business, item 10, review, we did that already, sorry. 11, discussion and recommendation to the Board of Trustees on the Public Works and Utility Committee request to amend section 74.6.06 street dimensional standards in chapter 74 subdivision regulations. And along with it is a resolution. Who would like to present?
Do we need Mark? Can we thank him or what?
He signed off.
Mark?
Mark signed off.
You still there, Mark?
No, he signed off when you started talking about his contract.
Okay.
Just on.
Who's going to lead on this?
Essentially, as part of the process to amend the subdivision ordinance, it has to come to the Plan Commission for review, and you basically adopt a resolution that'll go to the board. They're holding a public hearing. They're required to hold the public hearing for the subdivision ordinance. So as part of, and Michael could probably talk about this a little bit more, I put the history in there, but this stems back to basically the Crestwood Acres neighborhood reconstruction project, where they've made a change in the philosophy on reconstruction of streets. So there's a change that needs to be made to the subdivision ordinance to allow that. So that's to add that footnote number 9.
Right,
So that's the only change, going forward to the board next month, or next
Page 9.
meeting. They're holding a public hearing on that, so, this went to Public Works and Utility Committee, and that is the recommendation that they came forward with to you, is to add that footnote 9.
From what I read and understand, it gives a little more flexibility as far as when we come across these unique situations where
Right.
nothing's working.
You'll still have them on new projects, so basically, when a subdivision will go in, they'll be required to do the sidewalks and things like that. But reconstruction projects will be looked at a case by case, based off of the sidewalk and trail map.
I was gonna say it's the sidewalk and trail map. Michael, how often are you going to update that? At the direction of the board, or?
Yeah, I guess at the direction of the board, the Public Works Committee, Plan Commission, I mean, you know, every project, you know, we'll take a look at it, see what makes sense, and you know, the map was, you know, put together, kind of based off of previous sidewalk trail maps that we had in the village, and then also highlighting, you know, our collector arterial streets, you know, that are still not changing, you know, any of the red lines, you know, I guess there's no change to anything that's a road lines that are impacted.
I was here when this was first developed, was trying to make not an accommodation, but a compromise on maintaining connectivity to public places like schools, churches, shopping, and that type of issue in arterials as far as pedestrian safety and some of the more heavily trafficked streets is that's what I recall its purpose being.
Can we add that verbiage that the map is being directed by utilities committee, planning committee, or board of directors?
Yeah, I mean, you can add whatever you want. I guess we just said
I mean, I know it adds a little flexibility, but I think that any of those, I mean, the two committees as well as the trustees should be able to say that, change the map.
Yeah, I wouldn't disagree with that.
So, I got some questions on the map itself. Who constitutes, like say, if I'm looking down Weston Avenue, how do we know so that's a thoroughfare recommended future?
Weston Avenue is classified as an arterial street by the state of Wisconsin.
Okay.
So, the chart that clause, I guess, is only there for local road. So anything that's on the classified system as a collector arterial street, this change doesn't, it doesn't impact those.
So the dotted lines, it does not impact,
So the dotted line just means that's a future. So a solid line means something is existing.
Okay.
And a dotted line means when that road were to be reconstructed, it would get pedestrian accommodations put on it.
So Weston Avenue, how far along is the plan on that? And is that just one sidewalk on there?
Yeah, so the Weston Avenue corridor plan emphasize the multi-use path on the north side of the road, so that's what we're planning to put in there.
Sure. Okay.
And I guess we met with the designer last week to go over, you know, they're still shooting to have a 30% plan done by, I think it's November, late October.
It's the same deal with Grove Street, that's piece that's being rebuilt on Birch Street is supposed to have a bike ped path on one side, correct, Mike?
Correct, yep. So that's the blue dotted line then over there.
Yeah. So then the existing commercial development that was in the industrial park, is some of that already sidewalked? Some of it's not?
Yeah, so this loop, so on Enterprise Way and Venture Circle here, there is sidewalk on one side of the road there.
And then the other dotted, is that slated for future?
Yeah, I mean, again, that's a road that's our, I think it's a collector street, so.
Okay.
You know, I mean, there is a small section here where Wassa Supply is, where they put sidewalk in when they put their parking lot in. So
then in the area right off of X or the subdivision that we just spoke about, where I completely understand that the sidewalks would be so close to their homes.
Yeah,
Most of that subdivision has just been pulled out of there.
yeah, the whole subdivision was pulled out.
Crestwood, are you talking about Crestwood Acres?
Yes. So any of these where you have dotted lines, so let's just take over by like Steve Minell's house where it's dotted, that's half Rothschild, half Weston.
Correct.
If you pull a subdivision off of there to go all around Steve's house or whatever it may be, does that have to have sidewalks on both sides?
So a new development?
Yes.
Yeah, I mean, so this.
Are you talking to my neighbor?
Well, your neighbor wants sidewalk?
Well, he's got a for sale sign on it. I was just curious. Am I gonna have neighbors now?
Oh, no. I was just asking those questions. In any areas, no matter where you're at, you will need to have sidewalks.
Yeah, so this changes for reconstructed streets, not new streets.
Yep, I understand.
Yep.
So it's still staying the same, no matter where you're at, you have to have double sidewalks.
When you're redoing Weston Avenue from Rothschild, is that gonna have sidewalk?
They'll have a multi-use path on it, yeah.
Says sidewalks or multi-use?
Yeah, sidewalk, 2 5-foot sidewalks are like a
10-foot
multi-use path.
On our side or their side?
I'm trying to put it on their side, so they have to take care of it.
You have the 18.
Remember, this is recorded.
Every other block.
Yeah, switch them all.
Logistically, if
Pedestrian
we're putting it on
crosswalks
the
and
north
traffic
side, the east part, it probably makes sense to have it on the north side, on the west part, and
But it's on the
we come up with
wetlands.
whatever maintenance agreement we want with Rothschild as far as who,
On the north side, is there a lot of wetlands through there?
south side.
And the south side?
Yeah.
South side.
Yeah, wetlands. Okay. We've had discussion. Is there any recommendation or a motion? It's Jiminy. Jiminy Creek.
I'll make a motion to move to approve resolution 2021-PC-006.
We have a motion by Rumper. Is there a second?
I'll second it. Are we gonna add the map, the wording for the map?
You wanna add it with it being tied to the map, being periodically updated or something along that?
Yeah.
Or what exactly is your concern, Steve?
Well, my concern is that we just have the map and we're not saying how we're gonna modify that map. And we ended up having to have 2 or 3 meetings on the sidewalk issues for that neighborhood the last time, which is what brought this whole map thing up. I'm just saying that we should maybe address how future amendments to the map are gonna be done either by, the utilities.
Staff, Public Works and Utility, or?
That would be, I would
Subject
think
to
a
review on an
policy.
annual basis.
Yeah, that's not a footnote section piece.
No, that'd be-
That's somewhere else.
You
That'd be a
would
policy.
bring that to the board and have the board set that as a policy on how to adopt that map, because it's.
Or in the scope of practice of the Public Works and Utility, or in the scope of practice of Michael, Director of Public Works,
Or can we make it a motion to approve resolution 2021-PC-006 with further instruction to the Public Works Committee to consider annual updates or?
You just did.
But future annual updates.
There you go. That's your motion?
Okay, that'll be the motion then.
Okay. Thanks for working with that motion. On the question? All in favor, say aye. Aye. All opposed? So carried. Item 12 and 13, I think we can take those together.
Motion to approve.
Motion to acknowledge.
Second. Acknowledge.
Moved by Garrett, second by Cronin. On the question? All in favor, say aye. Aye.
Aye.
All opposed? So carried. Under miscellaneous, project updates, Jen?
Those are just standing items. You guys had asked to list those. Those are things that have to come back before you. I don't have any actions on that.
Next meeting date is scheduled for Monday, September 13th, 2021 at 6 p.m. Regular meeting. Remarks from staff? Emily? Jen? Jessica? Mr. Donner?
Nothing else.
Mr. Rodolsky? Any? Okay. Remarks from commission committee members? Mr. Crowe? Mr. Garrett? Mr. Jordan?
Good.
Mr. Manel? And I have nothing, so we'll entertain a motion. Pardon?
Gail.
Gail? Sorry.
No, I don't have anything. Thank you.
Okay. I apologize, out of sight, out of mind. Sorry. I'll entertain a motion to adjourn.
So moved.
Moved by Manel, second. Second by Mumford to adjourn. On the question. All in favor, say aye. Aye. All opposed? So carried. Thank you very much. It was a lot, we never have shown.
It's gonna be an early meeting.
So did I.